For centuries, one small city on the rocky coast of northern Italy quietly commanded a maritime world that stretched from the Atlantic to the Black Sea. Long before global empires rose under Spanish or British flags, Genoa, perched on the Ligurian coast, built a network of ports, colonies, and financial systems that linked Europe, Africa, and Asia. It did not conquer vast lands, yet its merchants controlled sea routes, its bankers financed kings, and its ships carried goods that shaped the medieval economy. This is the story of the Genoese maritime empire, how a community of traders and shipbuilders transformed a modest harbor into one of the most sophisticated commercial powers of the Middle Ages. Along the jagged Ligurian coast of northwestern Italy, the city of Genoa began as a small settlement pressed between mountains and sea. Its narrow harbor was little more than a natural inlet, a place where fishermen and traders sheltered their boats from Mediterranean winds. Yet from these modest beginnings emerged a republic that would one day project its power across seas and centuries. To understand the Genoese empire, one must begin here, when the city first looked outward from its stone walls toward the horizon. In the early medieval world of the 10th century, northern Italy was a patchwork of competing authorities. After the fall of the Western Roman Empire, the region had passed through the hands of Ostrogoths, Byzantines, and Lombards before becoming part of Charlemagne's vast Frankish dominion. But by the mid-10th century, the Carolingian order had fragmented. Imperial control weakened, and local powers, bishops, counts, and communes began to assert independence. Genoa, situated between the Alps and the sea, was among these frontier communities struggling for survival and self-rule. Life along the Ligurian coast was difficult but strategic. The mountains offered natural defense but limited farmland, pushing its inhabitants to seek resources elsewhere. The sea, dangerous yet full of promise, became Genoa's true frontier. Trade routes connected Liguria with Provence to the west, Tuscany to the south, and Lombardy inland. Salt, timber, and olive oil moved out of the region, while grain and luxury goods came in. Over time, this constant exchange fostered a class of merchants and sailors whose wealth did not depend on land, but on mobility. However, in the 10th and early 11th centuries, the Mediterranean was not a safe place. Muslim raiders from North Africa, often referred to as Saracens by Christian chroniclers, raided coastal settlements and captured ships across the Western Sea. The Ligurian coast suffered repeated attacks. Genoa itself was sacked in the mid-10th century, leaving parts of the city in ruins. These raids were devastating, but they also forced Genoa to organize for its own defense. The city's leaders realized that survival depended not on waiting for imperial protection, but on creating their own fleet. This turning point came as Genoa's citizens began to act collectively. In the absence of a strong feudal overlord, local families and church authorities took charge of rebuilding the city and defending its harbor. The Bishop of Genoa, who had previously been the main civic figure, now shared power with lay elites, wealthy merchants and shipowners who commanded men and vessels. By the end of the 11th century, this cooperation evolved into a new form of governance: the commune, an urban republic based on shared responsibility and mutual interest. The commune was not founded overnight. It emerged through practice, defending trade routes, repairing fortifications, and organizing naval expeditions. Early documents mention the Compagnia Communis, a sworn association of citizens formed for the defense of the city and its commerce. Membership in the Compagnia required an oath of loyalty, binding individuals to support common decisions and contribute to the fleet. This system marked a departure from feudal hierarchy. It was civic, contractual, and collective. It reflected Genoa's maritime mindset, cooperation born from necessity and opportunity. The geography of the Ligurian coast further shaped this identity. The harbor was small and shallow, forcing Genoese shipbuilders to innovate early. They developed lighter vessels capable of speed and maneuverability, ships that could patrol, trade, and fight with equal skill. Shipyards lined the waterfront, and the art of naval construction became both a local craft and a communal asset. Over time, Genoa's wooden galleys became its most valuable tool of independence. By the late 10th and early 11th centuries, Genoa's influence began to extend beyond its immediate shores. Coastal villages such as Savona and Ventimiglia acknowledged the city's growing power. Inland trade routes through the Apennines connected Genoa with the markets of Lombardy and the Po Valley, while seaborne connections reached Provence and Catalonia. With each voyage, Genoese merchants learned more about navigation, markets, and the complex politics of Mediterranean trade. The city's population grew, and its society became more complex. Powerful clans such as the Doria, Spinola, and Grimaldi families began to rise, their fortunes built on commerce and shipping rather than agriculture. The church, too, remained influential. Monasteries and religious orders invested in ships, while clerics often acted as brokers or record keepers for merchant ventures. This intertwining of commerce, religion, and politics was characteristic of early Genoa. Each relied on the other to survive and prosper. The 11th century was also a period of renewed contact between Christian Europe and the wider Mediterranean world. The fall of Muslim strongholds in southern Italy and the stabilization of the Norman kingdoms opened new routes for trade. Genoese merchants began to appear in foreign ports, carrying goods from northern Europe, wool, metalwork, and timber, and returning with spices, silk, and precious minerals. These ventures were risky, but profits were immense. To manage such risk, Genoese traders developed early forms of partnership contracts known as commenda, in which an investor financed a voyage and a captain carried it out, dividing the earnings by agreed shares. This model encouraged collaboration between capital and expertise, a pattern that would define Genoese enterprise for centuries. With prosperity came new ambitions. The city began to assert autonomy not only in commerce, but in governance. By the early 11th century, Genoa's consuls, elected magistrates representing the leading families, appeared in records, managing judicial and political affairs. The bishop's influence remained, but the lay elite increasingly controlled policy. This shift marked Genoa's transformation from an episcopal town into a self-governing commune. It was a quiet revolution, rooted not in ideology, but in economic power. Genoa's growing naval capacity also changed its relationship with neighboring powers. The Tuscan city of Pisa, its main rival on the western coast, was following a similar trajectory. Both cities expanded their fleets to combat piracy and secure trade routes, and both began to look toward the islands of Corsica and Sardinia as strategic bases. Early clashes between Genoa and Pisa foreshadowed centuries of rivalry that would dominate the western Mediterranean. At the same time, Genoa's alliances extended beyond Italy. The city supported Norman campaigns in southern Italy and Sicily, supplying ships and soldiers in exchange for trading privileges. Genoese participation in these ventures demonstrated its readiness to project power abroad, though still in partnership with others. What began as defensive cooperation soon became proactive expansion. These developments were gradual but cumulative. By the end of the 11th century, Genoa had transformed from a vulnerable coastal settlement into a dynamic maritime republic. Its people had mastered collective organization, technological innovation, and financial ingenuity, qualities that would define their empire. The communal oath that once bound citizens for defense now bound them for enterprise. The sea was no longer a threat, but the very medium of Genoese identity. By the final years of the 11th century, Genoa had already taken firm control of its own affairs. The city's fleets patrolled the Ligurian coast, its merchants traded as far as Provence and Catalonia, and its consuls ruled a self-confident commune. Yet Genoa's ambitions were still limited to the western Mediterranean, until a single event transformed its horizons entirely. That event was the First Crusade, and it would propel the Genoese far beyond their coastal homeland into the heart of the eastern Mediterranean world. When Pope Urban II called for the liberation of Jerusalem in the year 1095, Christian Europe was already in motion. The great pilgrimage of warriors, nobles, and peasants toward the Holy Land was a movement of faith, but it was also one of logistics. Armies could not march across continents without ships, supplies, and coastal bases. For this, the Crusaders turned to the maritime cities of Italy, Pisa, Venice, and above all, Genoa. At the time, Genoa's leadership recognized the opportunity. Participation in the crusade was not only a pious duty, but also a gateway to new markets and alliances. The Genoese commune, guided by its consuls and leading families, such as the Andrea Doria and Spinola, pledged ships and men to the cause. Contemporary chronicles, including the Gesta Francorum Ianuensium, record that in the spring of 1097, a large Genoese fleet of more than a dozen galleys set sail for the eastern Mediterranean, carrying warriors, craftsmen, and supplies. This expedition was unlike any previous voyage. The Genoese fleet did not simply transport crusaders, it acted as an independent force. The sailors brought siege equipment, engineers, and even carpenters capable of building towers and battering engines once they reached the Levant. Their expertise would prove crucial in several key battles, especially the siege of Antioch in 1098 and the eventual assault on Jerusalem in 1099. When the Genoese arrived off the Syrian coast, they joined a shifting coalition of crusading leaders, including Bohemond of Taranto, Raymond of Toulouse, and Godfrey of Bouillon. The Genoese role was clear: to control the sea, maintain supply lines, and capture coastal fortresses that could serve as ports. Their galleys blockaded enemy strongholds and landed troops at strategic points, often turning the tide of battle. One of the earliest examples of Genoese influence came during the siege of Antioch. As Christian forces struggled to breach the city's defenses, the Genoese fleet brought reinforcements and materials that allowed the Crusaders to sustain the siege. After Antioch fell, the Genoese secured trade privileges in the new principality, marking the beginning of their commercial foothold in the eastern Mediterranean. These privileges were not merely symbolic. They took the form of fondaci, designated trading quarters or enclaves where Genoese merchants could live, store goods, and conduct business under their own laws. In ports such as Antioch, Acre, and later Tyre, Genoese warehouses soon filled with spices, silks, and precious metals from the east. Every fortress captured by the Crusaders opened another door to commerce. Genoa's success in these ventures stemmed from its ability to blend faith, commerce, and maritime skill. While the Crusaders fought on land, the Genoese ensured that supplies flowed by sea. Their convoys carried not only warriors but also merchants, craftsmen, and interpreters. For Genoa, the Crusades were not a temporary campaign. They were a sustained engagement with the Eastern world. By the early 12th century, Genoa had established a network of outposts along the Levantine coast. The Treaty of Jerusalem, granted by King Baldwin I after the capture of the city, recognized Genoese contributions and rewarded them with property, tax exemptions, and the right to maintain their own churches and courts. These concessions turned the Genoese quarter of Jerusalem into a self-contained colony, effectively an extension of the Republic within a distant land. Each of these privileges carried both religious and economic weight. The Church of San Lorenzo in Jerusalem, built with Genoese support, symbolized faith and presence. Meanwhile, the warehouses nearby were filled with goods that linked the Levant to Europe: cotton from Syria, spices from Arabia, and silk from Constantinople. The Genoese were quick to organize shipping routes that connected these eastern goods to markets in Provence, Tuscany, and Lombardy. The city's growing prosperity at home reflected these new connections. By the year 1120, Genoa's harbor was crowded with ships from the east, and its markets overflowed with imported luxuries. The commune reinvested profits into shipbuilding, fortifications, and new voyages. Wealth generated from crusading trade financed the construction of churches and civic buildings, many of which still stand as reminders of this era of expansion. The Crusades also transformed Genoa's political landscape. The commune, once a defensive alliance, evolved into a more sophisticated republic with institutional continuity. Consuls now negotiated directly with kings and princes abroad, and Genoese envoys appeared in the courts of Jerusalem, Antioch, and Constantinople. Through these interactions, the city learned the art of diplomacy, a skill that would become as vital as naval warfare in maintaining its empire. Equally significant was the rise of a merchant aristocracy. Families that had financed crusading expeditions returned with immense profits and prestige. The Embriaco family, for instance, became legendary for their role in capturing the city of Gibele, modern Byblos, and establishing a hereditary lordship there. These successes blurred the line between commerce and conquest, between merchant and noble. For the first time, Genoa's citizens held territory overseas, a glimpse of the colonial empire that would follow. However, Genoa's expansion was not without challenges. The same seas that brought wealth also carried rivalry. The Pisans and Venetians, fellow participants in the Crusades, competed fiercely for the same trading privileges. In Acre, for example, the city's port was divided into separate quarters controlled by Genoa, Pisa, and Venice, each jealously guarding its rights. Tensions often flared into open conflict, and naval skirmishes between Italian fleets became a regular feature of Eastern politics. These rivalries underscored a new reality. The Mediterranean was no longer a fragmented frontier, but a contested economic system. The Genoese, Venetians, and Pisans formed what some historians call the Maritime communes, independent republics whose power rested not on land, but on trade. Their fortunes depended on who could secure the best routes, the safest ports, and the most favorable alliances. For Genoa, the early 12th century marked the beginning of its rise as a trans-Mediterranean power. The experience of the Crusades gave its sailors global awareness and political sophistication. They learned to negotiate privileges, maintain colonies, and navigate complex networks of faith and profit. Most importantly, the Crusades had introduced Genoa to the riches of the East, spices, silks, and precious goods that would fuel its economy for generations. Back in Liguria, the city's population grew as returning merchants invested their wealth at home. New shipyards were built along the harbor, and the civic government expanded its administrative offices to manage the flow of goods and taxes. The commune's success depended on order, and this required institutions capable of handling the demands of empire. The foundations of Genoese bureaucracy, contracts, ledgers, and notarial records can be traced to this period, when commerce first demanded precision. The psychological transformation of Genoa during this era is equally important. Once a defensive community against pirates, it now saw itself as an actor in world affairs. Its ships carried not only goods but also influence, and its citizens believed that their prosperity came from collective enterprise. This confidence, born of crusading success, would define Genoa's identity for centuries. By the opening decades of the 12th century, Genoa was no longer simply a coastal city thriving on trade. It had become a functioning republic ruled by its own citizens and sustained by the sea. The experiences of the Crusades had expanded its horizons and brought immense wealth, but with prosperity came the challenge of governance. How could a city composed of powerful merchant families, ambitious shipowners, and competing interests maintain order and unity? The answer lay in the creation of an institutional framework that balanced independence, cooperation, and the collective pursuit of maritime power. The Genoese commune evolved in response to both opportunity and necessity. Its early political organization, built around the Compagnia Communis, had been adequate for defense and limited trade. But by the mid-12th century, the city's growing population, overseas ventures, and rising economic stakes demanded more formal governance. The consuls, who had originally served as temporary magistrates for civic disputes, now assumed executive authority. Each year, several consuls, usually 4 or 6, representing the major noble families, were elected to manage public affairs, preside over courts, and command fleets. Their power was collective, ensuring that no single lineage dominated. This system reflected Genoa's republican ethos. Unlike feudal monarchies or ecclesiastical states, Genoa's legitimacy rested on civic consent and oath. Citizens swore allegiance to the commune rather than to a sovereign lord. This civic oath, renewed periodically, was not just symbolic. It created a binding social contract that required participation in defense, taxation, and naval service. The sea, as both threat and opportunity, had taught Genoa the value of shared responsibility. The 12th century also witnessed the gradual codification of Genoa's laws. The Statuta Genuae, first compiled during this period, combined customary law, mercantile practice, and communal decrees. These statutes regulated trade, inheritance, and maritime contracts, setting standards for shipping and credit that would influence Mediterranean commerce for centuries. For example, they outlined how risk and profit were to be divided among investors in a commenda partnership, how shipmasters were to treat their crews, and how disputes between merchants were to be resolved by arbitration rather than violence. Such legal clarity was essential in a city whose prosperity depended on trust and calculation. The heart of Genoa's strength lay in its maritime system. Shipbuilding became an industry of civic pride and technical mastery. Genoese shipwrights perfected the construction of galleys, long, narrow vessels propelled by both oars and sails, capable of swift movement in battle and trade alike. Each galley represented the combined investment of several families who shared in its profits and risks. Over time, the commune organized convoys for long-distance voyages, ensuring mutual protection against pirates and rivals. These convoys also doubled as naval squadrons when war called. To sustain its fleets, Genoa required both material and manpower. The surrounding Ligurian countryside provided timber from the Apennine forests, while iron came from nearby mines in the Lunigiana and Elba regions. The commune established administrative offices to oversee shipyard production, repair facilities, and armament supply. Citizens were required to serve when called upon, forming a semi-professional navy that could be mobilized quickly. Maritime defense and commerce were thus woven into the civic fabric. As Genoa's fleets sailed farther afield, the city's economic and social order deepened in complexity. Merchant guilds emerged to coordinate trade in different goods, grain, cloth, spices, and metals, each with its own statutes and privileges. These guilds not only represented economic interests, but also provided social cohesion, organizing mutual aid, charitable works, and even festivals that reinforced civic identity. In a republic without a king, community rituals became the glue that held society together. The church continued to play a crucial role, though now it shared power rather than monopolizing it. Bishops remained important figures, but the cathedral chapter often collaborated with the consuls on civic matters. Religious institutions such as the monasteries of San Frutuoso and San Siro benefited from donations by merchant families eager to secure both spiritual salvation and public recognition. Church processions and civic assemblies often intertwined, symbolizing the balance between piety and politics. Foreign affairs provided another arena in which Genoa's institutions proved their effectiveness. The city maintained permanent consuls in major Mediterranean ports, particularly in the Crusader states and in Muslim lands where trade continued despite religious boundaries. These consuls acted as diplomats, judges, and representatives for Genoese merchants abroad. Their presence signaled a new phenomenon in European history, a city-state with an organized foreign service. Through these consular networks, Genoa extended its influence without the need for territorial conquest. Relations with neighboring powers, however, were more turbulent. The 12th century saw increasing tension between Genoa and Pisa, both competing for control over Corsica and Sardinia. Each island offered not only resources, but also strategic command of the sea lanes between Italy, France, and North Africa. The rivalry often erupted into naval warfare, where Genoese galleys met Pisan fleets in fierce battles that tested both tactics and endurance. These conflicts spurred further naval innovation as each city sought advantage through better ship design, crew discipline, and coordination. At home, the pressures of expansion also reshaped Genoa's social order. As wealth from trade accumulated, a gap widened between the ruling elite, drawn from the old patrician families, and the broader citizenry of artisans, sailors, and small merchants. Political participation remained limited to those who could afford the obligations of office, such as funding ships or maintaining troops. Yet, despite this inequality, Genoa's government retained a degree of fluidity uncommon in feudal Europe. Wealth, not birth alone, could open the door to power. Successful merchants who financed voyages or supplied fleets could rise into the ranks of the ruling class. By the mid-12th century, Genoa's reputation as a maritime republic was recognized throughout Christendom. Popes and emperors sought its alliance, aware that control of the seas often decided the outcomes of wars. Genoa's fleet supported imperial and papal campaigns at various times, though the city remained fiercely protective of its autonomy. The commune's guiding principle was practical independence. Alliances were made for advantage, not for loyalty. This pragmatism, sometimes criticized by chroniclers, allowed Genoa to survive the shifting tides of medieval politics. The 12th century also marked the beginning of Genoa's architectural and cultural flowering. Wealth from trade financed the construction of monumental buildings such as the Cathedral of San Lorenzo, rebuilt in the Romanesque style with alternating bands of black and white marble. The new palaces of the Doria, Grimaldi, and Spinola families displayed civic pride and private opulence. Public works, including the expansion of the harbor and the repair of city walls, symbolized the commune's stability and ambition. Even the layout of Genoa's streets, narrow, steep, and crowded, reflected a city growing upward and outward, constrained by geography but driven by energy. Throughout this period, Genoa maintained a delicate balance between competition and cooperation among its elite. The leading families often quarreled, forming factions around rival consuls or foreign policies. Yet, when external threats arose, whether from Pisa, the Saracens, or imperial forces, they united under the banner of the commune. The memory of shared defense and the promise of collective profit bound them together. It was this capacity for unity in crisis that allowed Genoa to endure for centuries, despite constant internal tension. Genoa's administrative sophistication also advanced in step with its commercial complexity. The city's notaries, skilled in drafting contracts and charters, became essential figures in every transaction. Their meticulous records preserved the details of voyages, partnerships, and property exchanges. These documents provide historians with an extraordinary window into Genoese life, revealing a society governed by law and calculation. In many ways, the notary's pen was as vital to Genoa's empire as the sailor's oar. The commune's institutions even reached into the spiritual and moral realms of daily life. Regulations on gambling, dress, and public behavior reflected a desire to maintain civic order and morality. Charity toward the poor and support for hospitals were encouraged, funded by wealthy merchants seeking to balance profit with piety. Such policies not only eased social tensions but also projected an image of moral legitimacy essential for a republic that ruled without kings. By the middle of the 12th century, Genoa had secured its place as a powerful maritime republic with institutions that could command fleets, negotiate alliances, and regulate vast networks of trade. Yet its rise now brought it into direct conflict with another formidable seafaring power, Pisa. Both cities, built on commerce and the sea, sought control of the same waters, the same islands, and the same routes that linked Italy to the western Mediterranean. The rivalry between Genoa and Pisa would define the next century, shaping not only their fortunes, but the political geography of the entire Tyrrhenian Sea. Sardinia and Corsica were the central prizes in this contest. To the Genoese, these islands were more than distant possessions, they were strategic stepping stones. Sardinia offered timber, salt, and grain, while Corsica, closer to Liguria, provided harbors and a buffer against invasion. Together, they formed a chain of naval outposts, vital for protecting merchant convoys and asserting dominance over the western sea lanes. Pisa understood this as well, and both republics moved to extend their influence through diplomacy, warfare, and commerce. At the start of the 12th century, both islands were divided into semi-independent regions known as giudicati, small kingdoms ruled by local judges or giudici. These rulers often balanced their alliances between Pisa and Genoa, seeking protection from one while trading with the other. The Genoese approached these territories through a mixture of military intervention and commercial partnership. They offered ships, arms, and advisors in exchange for privileges, gradually weaving the islands into their sphere of influence. In Sardinia, the Giudicati of Torres and Arborea leaned toward Genoa, while Cagliari and Gallura favored Pisa. This division mirrored the competition between the two mainland powers and ensured that conflict was inevitable. Genoese families such as the Doria, Spinola, and Malaspina invested heavily in Sardinian trade and politics, sending younger sons as envoys and governors. These families began to acquire estates and castles on the island, blending commerce with feudal lordship. Over time, their private ambitions would intertwine with the Republic's official policy. Corsica, by contrast, was closer and more directly influenced by Genoa. The island's rugged terrain and scattered population made it difficult to control, but it offered valuable timber for shipbuilding and served as a convenient naval station. Throughout the 12th century, Genoa's presence grew through the establishment of small colonies and garrisons along the coast. Local communities were often drawn into the Genoese orbit through trade, taxation, and the construction of coastal fortresses. The contest between Genoa and Pisa escalated during the 12th century into open naval warfare. The seas between Liguria, Tuscany, and Sardinia became battlegrounds where fleets of galleys clashed in fierce engagements. These battles were not just military events, they were contests of technology, organization, and endurance. The Genoese perfected their naval tactics, using formations that maximized the speed and striking power of their galleys. Crews trained for coordinated maneuvers, archers occupied raised platforms, and boarding parties specialized in close combat. One of the earliest major confrontations occurred near the Sardinian coast in the mid-12th century. Genoa's victory in that campaign secured temporary dominance over several coastal fortresses, but Pisa quickly recovered. The struggle would continue intermittently for nearly a century with alternating gains and losses. Both republics also sought legitimacy through papal mediation, appealing to Rome to confirm their rights over the islands. The papacy, however, often exploited the rivalry to maintain its own authority, recognizing one city's claim one year and the other's the next. The competition over Sardinia and Corsica was about more than territory. It was about control of trade routes, linking the Italian mainland with Provence, Catalonia, and North Africa. The Tyrrhenian Sea was the economic heart of the Western Mediterranean, carrying grain, salt, cloth, and slaves between Europe and Africa. Whoever dominated these waters could tax commerce, secure supplies, and dictate political alliances. For Genoa, mastery of this region was essential to protect its growing mercantile empire. During this period, the Genoese also began to develop a distinct approach to colonial administration. Rather than direct rule from the commune, the city often delegated authority to leading families or associations of investors. These groups, known as maone, would later become a defining feature of Genoese overseas governance, but their roots lay in the 12th century management of Corsica and Sardinia. A maona combined public authority with private capital, allowing Genoa to project power without overburdening its state treasury. Genoa's economic reach also expanded westward beyond the Italian islands. Its merchants established steady contact with Provence and the ports of southern France. They supplied grain to Marseille, exported Ligurian olive oil, and imported cloth and wine. From there, they extended to Catalonia, where Genoese trading posts appeared in Barcelona and Tortosa. This western expansion diversified Genoa's trade network, reducing dependence on the eastern routes dominated by Venice. The constant warfare with Pisa also forced Genoa to refine its financial systems. Maintaining fleets was costly, requiring regular contributions from the citizenry. To fund military campaigns, the commune developed new instruments of public credit, borrowing from wealthy merchants in exchange for tax revenues or shares of captured booty. These early experiments with state finance laid the groundwork for institutions that would later make Genoa Europe's financial capital. Despite the intensity of its rivalry with Pisa, Genoa's diplomacy remained flexible. The Republic maintained friendly relations with the Norman rulers of southern Italy and Sicily, whose fleets operated in the same seas. Genoese ships frequented Palermo and Messina, exchanging goods with the multicultural markets of the Norman kingdom. The alliance with the Normans proved useful in balancing Pisan influence and securing Genoa's southern flank. Culturally and politically, the 12th and early 13th centuries were a time of consolidation. The city's communal institutions matured, and the concept of civic identity deepened. Genoese chroniclers began to write histories that celebrated the city's victories and justified its expansion. The historian Caffaro di Rustico, who had served as both admiral and diplomat, composed detailed annals of Genoa's deeds, emphasizing its divine favor and martial courage. His works not only recorded events, but also shaped the Republic's self-image as a chosen maritime power. Internally, however, success brought growing tension. The same families who financed ships and conquered islands also dominated the commune's politics. Factional rivalries between noble clans sometimes erupted into violence, particularly when disputes arose over the division of spoils from Sardinia or the appointment of colonial governors. These conflicts foreshadowed the later struggles that would shake the Republic, though for now, the shared purpose of defeating Pisa kept the factions united. By the turn of the 13th century, Genoa had established firm control over Corsica, while Sardinia remained divided. The balance of power in the Tyrrhenian Sea still hung in the balance, but Genoa's maritime infrastructure was stronger than ever. Its shipyards worked continuously, producing not only war galleys but also large merchant vessels known as navi that could carry heavy cargoes across long distances. These innovations gave Genoa an advantage in both trade and transport, allowing it to sustain prolonged naval campaigns. The rivalry reached a crucial stage in the decades that followed. While Pisa still held influence in parts of Sardinia, Genoa's naval superiority became increasingly evident. The commune's ability to mobilize large fleets, finance long expeditions, and coordinate distant operations set it apart from most medieval cities. Each campaign expanded the city's experience in administration and logistics, skills that would later serve its global ventures. Beyond the immediate conflict, Genoa's presence in the Western Mediterranean had broader consequences. Its garrisons and merchants acted as conduits for cultural exchange, transmitting technologies, art, and ideas between Italy, France, and Spain. Genoese coins circulated widely, and their system of maritime law influenced local statutes from Corsica to Catalonia. The Republic's impact was visible not only in the movement of goods, but in the spread of institutions and practices that defined Mediterranean commerce. The contest with Pisa finally reached its decisive phase later in the 13th century, but the groundwork for that victory was laid in these earlier decades of struggle and consolidation. Genoa's control of Corsica and growing influence in Sardinia ensured its dominance over the Tyrrhenian routes. The city had turned its maritime power into territorial footholds, transforming itself from a trading commune into an emerging naval empire. By the late 13th century, Genoa and Pisa had been locked in conflict for more than 100 years. Their rivalry over the islands of Sardinia and Corsica and control of the Tyrrhenian Sea had grown into a contest for maritime supremacy itself. Both republics had developed powerful fleets, wealthy merchant classes, and ambitious ruling families who viewed the sea not merely as a means of trade, but as a stage for power. Yet the balance between them could not last forever. The decisive confrontation came in the year 1284 off the coast of Tuscany in what became known as the Battle of Meloria, an event that forever changed the balance of power in the Western Mediterranean. By this time, the political landscape of Italy was undergoing transformation. The authority of the Holy Roman Emperors had weakened, while the papacy alternately encouraged and manipulated the struggles between the maritime republics. Pisa, though still strong, had begun to decline economically. Its inland trade routes faced competition from Florence, and its population had suffered from previous wars and blockades. Genoa, meanwhile, had grown more experienced and more organized. Its shipyards could produce fleets faster, its financial system could fund long campaigns, and its political leadership had learned to balance competing factions for the sake of war. The roots of the Meloria conflict lay in Genoa's continuing expansion across the Western Mediterranean. By the mid-13th century, the Republic had consolidated control over Corsica and strengthened its influence in Sardinia through alliances with local rulers. Pisa viewed these developments as intolerable encroachments. The two cities began launching raids and counter-raids, attacking each other's convoys and colonies. In the early 1280s, hostilities escalated after Genoa's ally, the Judge of Arborea in Sardinia, clashed with Pisan forces over territorial claims. The Genoese Senate responded by preparing for a full-scale naval confrontation. The admiral chosen to command the expedition was Andrea Doria, a seasoned commander from one of the city's most powerful families. Doria represented not only military skill, but also the unity of Genoa's elite, which had set aside internal disputes to focus on victory at sea. Pisa, for its part, placed its hopes in Alberto Morosini and a fleet that combined its remaining naval strength with mercenaries and allies from Tuscany. The Battle of Meloria took place near a small rocky islet of the same name, off the coast of Livorno. On a summer morning in August of 1284, the two fleets sighted each other across calm waters. Contemporary accounts describe the Genoese fleet as composed of nearly 80 galleys arranged in disciplined formation, while the Pisan force numbered around 72. Although exact figures vary in different chronicles, the general consensus is that Genoa held a slight advantage in both numbers and organization. What distinguished Genoa that day was not just its ships, but its system. The Republic's war fleets were not improvised gatherings of private vessels, but coordinated squadrons built, maintained, and manned through a combination of state direction and private partnership. Crews were trained for battle, and captains followed a unified command. Pisa's fleet, in contrast, relied more heavily on local contingents and individual patrons, each accustomed to operating independently. As the battle began, the Genoese deployed in two divisions. The first, under Andrea Doria himself, engaged the main Pisan line directly, while a second, led by Benedetto Zaccaria, a brilliant tactician and future admiral, circled to attack the enemy flank. The Genoese galleys advanced in disciplined formation, their oars beating in perfect rhythm. Arrows and bolts darkened the air as both sides exchanged volleys, followed by the crash of rams and the thunder of grappling hooks as ships closed for boarding. Eyewitness accounts from later chroniclers depict the sea covered with wreckage and the cries of men echoing across the waves. The battle raged for hours, with both sides fighting fiercely, but the Genoese coordination and experience gradually told. Zaccaria's flanking maneuver cut off the Pisan rear, surrounding a large portion of their fleet. Once encircled, the Pisan ships were overwhelmed one by one. By the end of the day, Pisa's navy was shattered. Nearly 30 of its galleys were captured, many burned, and thousands of its sailors and nobles taken prisoner. The consequences of Meloria were immense. Pisa's naval power was effectively destroyed. The city lost not only ships and men, but also its maritime confidence. Genoa, on the other hand, emerged as the unchallenged ruler of the Western Mediterranean. The battle was celebrated at home as a divine vindication of the Republic's endurance and courage. In the port of Genoa, the captured Pisan banners were hung in triumph, and the prisoners were marched through the streets before being confined to years of labor in the city's shipyards. The victory also had deep political and economic repercussions. With Pisa crippled, Genoa could now secure its dominance over Corsica and Sardinia without significant opposition. Trade routes through the Tyrrhenian Sea and the Western Mediterranean passed firmly under Genoese control. Merchant convoys sailed with greater safety, and profits soared. The Republic's influence expanded not only across the seas but also inland, where its bankers and traders extended credit to Tuscan and Lombard cities. In the years that followed, Genoa consolidated its supremacy by strengthening its institutions. The communal government reorganized its naval administration, creating permanent offices to oversee shipbuilding, logistics, and finance. The profits of war were carefully reinvested in new fleets and fortifications. The Republic also rewarded its leading families with offices and privileges, ensuring their loyalty while maintaining the delicate balance of power that defined Genoese politics. The aftermath of Meloria also changed the cultural and psychological landscape of Genoa. For generations, Pisan raiders and fleets had been the great rival and constant threat. Their defeat removed a long-standing fear and replaced it with a sense of destiny. Genoa now looked beyond the Tyrrhenian toward larger ambitions. With the Western Mediterranean secure, attention turned eastward to the Aegean, Constantinople, and the Black Sea. There lay opportunities greater than any found on the Italian islands. While Pisa struggled to recover, its decline opened new doors for other powers as well. Venice, the other great maritime republic, watched closely. With one rival removed, the competition between Venice and Genoa would soon intensify, leading to centuries of warfare and diplomacy. But in the immediate aftermath of Meloria, Genoa's position seemed unassailable. The victory also reshaped Genoa's internal society. The influx of wealth from trade and captured goods enriched the merchant aristocracy, but widened the gap between rich and poor. The ruling families, Doria, Spinola, Grimaldi, and others, became virtually dynastic in their control of offices. Factional conflicts simmered beneath the surface, occasionally erupting into street violence or political intrigue. Yet even these tensions could not overshadow the prosperity that flowed from Genoa's mastery of the seas. The Republic's foreign relations also evolved. The papacy, long cautious of the city's growing power, sought to maintain friendly ties, recognizing Genoa's value as a naval ally in future crusading efforts. Kings and princes from Spain to France courted Genoese merchants and shipowners, offering privileges and contracts in exchange for loans or naval support. Genoa's reputation as both a military and financial powerhouse began to take shape during this period. One of the most significant long-term results of the Meloria victory was the expansion of Genoa's maritime law and administrative sophistication. The need to manage conquered territories, prisoners, and vast sums of war booty encouraged legal innovation. The Republic formalized regulations for prize distribution, taxation, and the repayment of public debt. These measures not only strengthened the state but also demonstrated how deeply intertwined commerce and warfare had become in Genoese life. Meanwhile, Pisa never fully recovered. Its population declined, its harbor silted up, and its merchants shifted their operations inland to Florence or north to Lucca. Though it remained a cultural center, its days as a naval power were over. The shadow of Meloria lingered for centuries, remembered as the moment when one republic fell and another rose to dominate the Mediterranean. In the decades following the Battle of Meloria, Genoa stood unrivaled in the Western Mediterranean. With Pisa broken and Venice occupied elsewhere, the Republic turned its gaze eastward toward the fabled riches of Byzantium and the Black Sea. The victory at Meloria had secured Genoa's dominance near home, but the city's merchants and financiers understood that true wealth lay in the east, in the silk, spices, furs, and grains that flowed through Constantinople, the gateway between Europe and Asia. What followed was one of the most consequential chapters in Genoa's history: the forging of the Treaty of Nymphaeum in the year 1261 and the opening of a vast commercial empire stretching across the Black Sea. To grasp the magnitude of this shift, one must recall the political landscape of the mid-13th century. Constantinople, once the jewel of the Byzantine Empire, had fallen to the Latin Crusaders during the Fourth Crusade in the year 1204. For more than half a century, the Latin Empire ruled the city, supported by Venice, which seized many of Byzantium's ports and islands as its spoils. This Venetian dominance shut Genoa out of the Aegean and Eastern Mediterranean markets, forcing its merchants to rely on indirect trade or risky overland ventures. The restoration of the Byzantine Empire under Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos in 1261 changed everything. Michael VIII needed allies. To retake Constantinople from the Latin occupiers, he required ships, supplies, and naval expertise, resources that Genoa could readily provide. The Venetians, who had supported the Latin Empire, were his natural enemies. Recognizing the opportunity, Genoa offered its fleet in exchange for sweeping commercial privileges once the Byzantines regained their capital. The agreement was formalized as the Treaty of Nymphaeum, signed in March of that year. The treaty marked a turning point for both Genoa and Byzantium. In return for providing military support against Venice and the Latins, Genoa received unprecedented rights: exemption from most imperial taxes, permission to establish its own quarter in Constantinople, and exclusive access to trade throughout the Black Sea. This was not merely an alliance, it was an open door to an entire world of commerce that had been largely closed to Western Europe. True to his word, Michael VIII soon reconquered Constantinople. In late summer of 1261, his troops entered the city and the Byzantine Empire was restored. As the Latin rulers fled, Genoese ships arrived in triumph, carrying supplies and envoys to secure their promised privileges. Almost overnight, Genoa replaced Venice as the dominant Western power in Byzantine waters. The establishment of the Genoese quarter in Constantinople transformed the city's economy. Located in the suburb of Galata, across the Golden Horn, the quarter became a self-governing enclave, effectively a city within a city. Genoese merchants built warehouses, churches, and palaces, all surrounded by sturdy walls. The district quickly filled with traders, bankers, and artisans from Liguria and beyond. Ships from Genoa, Savona, and Chiavari anchored daily in the harbor, unloading goods from the west and taking aboard the silks, spices, and grains of the east. From Galata, Genoese commerce radiated outward across the Black Sea. Within a few decades, the Republic established a chain of colonies and trading stations that came to be known collectively as the Gazaria. These included key ports such as Caffa, modern Feodosia, in Crimea, Tana at the mouth of the Don River, and Sinope and Trebizond along the Anatolian coast. Each served a specific function in Genoa's vast trading web. Caffa, the jewel of Gazaria, became one of the most cosmopolitan cities of the medieval world. Founded in the early 14th century under Genoese administration, it served as the principal hub for trade between Europe and the Mongol-controlled regions of Central Asia. From here, goods flowed along the Silk Road to and from China and Persia: furs, slaves, spices, and textiles. Genoese merchants, using their advanced financial techniques, financed caravans, arranged credit, and organized the transport of goods across thousands of miles. The Republic's success in the Black Sea rested on a blend of diplomacy, adaptability, and sheer enterprise. The Mongol rulers of the Golden Horde, who controlled the Crimean Peninsula and much of southern Russia, valued Genoese trade and taxed it heavily but permitted the colonies to function autonomously. Genoese envoys regularly negotiated with Mongol khans, ensuring safe passage for their ships and merchants. This ability to cooperate with non-Christian powers, guided more by profit than ideology, distinguished Genoa from many contemporary European states. The economic impact of the Black Sea trade on Genoa was enormous. Grain from the fertile plains of Ukraine and southern Russia fed the city's growing population. Slaves captured in steppe raids or purchased from local traders were sold in Mediterranean markets, particularly to Mamluk Egypt, where demand was constant. Timber, wax, honey, and furs flowed westward, while European cloth, metalwork, and wine moved east. The Genoese did not merely trade, they managed entire logistical systems using convoys and insurance contracts to minimize risk and maximize returns. This expansion also stimulated Genoa's domestic economy. The profits from Eastern commerce funded new shipyards, warehouses, and financial houses in Liguria. The city's bankers, already skilled in lending and credit, developed more sophisticated methods for handling long-distance transactions. Bills of exchange, maritime insurance, and complex partnership contracts became standard practice. Through this web of finance, Genoa extended its reach even further, investing in ventures that spanned continents. Yet the new prosperity came with challenges. The distance between the homeland and its colonies required constant communication and coordination. To manage these far-flung possessions, Genoa created innovative administrative mechanisms. Colonies were often governed by representatives known as podesta, appointed for fixed terms and bound by detailed contracts. They were responsible for defense, taxation, and relations with local rulers. In some cases, administration was delegated to private syndicates of investors, early forms of corporate management that blended public authority with private enterprise. The Republic's success in the East inevitably rekindled its rivalry with Venice. The Venetians, excluded from the Black Sea, sought to undermine Genoese influence through alliances and war. The two powers clashed repeatedly in the latter half of the 13th century and throughout the 14th. Each war devastated trade and strained resources, but neither side could eliminate the other. Their struggle would culminate decades later in the War of Chioggia. But the roots of that conflict were already taking hold in this era of expansion. Culturally, the opening of Byzantium and the Black Sea transformed Genoa into a true crossroads of civilizations. The flow of people and goods brought new ideas, technologies, and artistic influences to Liguria. Byzantine art and architecture inspired Genoese churches, while Eastern silks and ceramics adorned the homes of the wealthy. In the opposite direction, Western craftsmanship, Latin learning, and Christian missionaries traveled east aboard Genoese ships. The city had become, in effect, a hinge between continents. Amid this prosperity, figures such as Benedetto Zaccaria exemplified the Genoese spirit of enterprise. Zaccaria, an admiral, diplomat, and merchant, played a leading role in establishing Genoa's eastern colonies and even governed the island of Chios under Genoese authority. His career blended military command, trade, and political negotiation, a model for the multifaceted Genoese elite. Through such men, Genoa's empire grew not by conquest, but by contract, by combining force when needed with calculation when possible. The Treaty of Nymphaeum thus marked the beginning of Genoa's Eastern Empire and the high point of its global reach. From a small city on the Ligurian coast, Genoa had built a network of ports and markets stretching from the Atlantic to the Caspian Sea. Its merchants dealt with princes, emperors, and khans. Its language was spoken in markets from Trebizond to Tunis. This success was built on flexibility, a willingness to trade with any power, adapt to any culture, and profit from any opportunity. By the dawn of the 14th century, Genoa had become one of the most powerful commercial republics in the world. Its network of colonies stretched from the Black Sea to the Western Mediterranean, binding together a vast system of trade, finance, and maritime law. But the scale of this empire demanded new forms of organization. The old communal structures, designed for a single city and its nearby territories, could not easily manage outposts thousands of miles away. Out of this necessity, and the entrepreneurial instincts of Genoa's merchant elite, emerged one of the most remarkable innovations of the medieval world, the maona, a hybrid of corporation, syndicate, and colonial government. The maone system represented Genoa's genius for combining private enterprise with public authority. Instead of directly governing distant colonies through the communal government, Genoa delegated administration to groups of private investors. These investors, wealthy families, merchants, or consortia, financed the defense and management of a colony in exchange for control of its revenues and trade. The arrangement allowed the Republic to expand its influence without straining the city's limited resources, while giving investors both profit and prestige. The origins of the maone can be traced to the early 14th century, particularly in the administration of Genoa's eastern colonies. As trade in the Black Sea intensified, the costs of maintaining fleets, fortresses, and garrisons grew sharply. The Republic's treasury could not sustain these expenses indefinitely, especially amid recurring wars with Venice and internal unrest. Private capital provided the solution. Wealthy merchants who already financed voyages and banking operations now extended their reach into governance itself. The most famous early example of this system was the maona of Chios and Phocia, established in the mid-14th century. The island of Chios, situated near the coast of Asia Minor, was renowned for its production of mastic, a rare resin prized in medicine, cooking, and luxury goods. Nearby Phocaea possessed valuable alum mines, essential for the European textile industry. When the Genoese took control of these territories, the commune lacked funds to defend and exploit them. A group of investors, led by the powerful Zaccaria family, stepped in. They formed a maona, contributing money and ships in exchange for rights to manage the island's administration and collect revenues. Under this arrangement, the maona acted almost like a chartered company centuries before such institutions appeared in Northern Europe. It maintained its own troops, governed local populations, and managed trade under the loose supervision of the Genoese Senate. The investors shared profits according to their capital contributions, and in return, they pledged to defend the territory on behalf of the Republic. It was a model of pragmatic governance, efficient, profit-driven, and adaptable to the realities of maritime empire. The success of the maona of Chios and Phocaea inspired similar ventures elsewhere. In the Black Sea, especially in the port of Caffa, groups of merchants and creditors organized to manage taxes, customs, and naval protection. These arrangements blurred the line between public office and private investment. A man could serve as governor, merchant, and shareholder all at once. His authority derived not from royal appointment, but from contract and capital. The maone embodied the Genoese spirit: risk shared, power divided, and profit pursued with precision. Caffa, the jewel of Genoa's eastern dominion, exemplified this new form of private empire. Founded in the late 13th century and expanded under Genoese administration in the 14th, Caffa grew into a thriving metropolis. Its harbor teemed with ships from across the Mediterranean and beyond: Greek, Armenian, Tatar, and Arab vessels trading alongside Genoese galleys. Streets were lined with warehouses, workshops, and markets selling everything from silk and spices to slaves and grain. The city's cosmopolitan population spoke many languages and practiced several religions, yet it operated under the efficient order of Genoese law and commerce. The government of Caffa reflected the logic of the maone system. The city was officially under the authority of Genoa, but daily administration rested in the hands of a governor or consul appointed by the investors. The consul managed justice, defense, and diplomacy, while trade regulation and taxation were overseen by committees of merchants. Revenues from customs and markets were distributed among the shareholders who financed the colony's upkeep. In practice, Caffa functioned as a semi-autonomous republic, a miniature Genoa transplanted to the Black Sea. The economic reach of Caffa was extraordinary. It served as the main port for the exchange of goods between the Mongol territories of the Golden Horde and the markets of the Mediterranean. From the vast Eurasian steppes came furs, wax, and slaves. From Persia and India arrived spices, silk, and gems. Genoese merchants exported European textiles, metalwork, and wine in return. The trade in human beings, though deeply troubling to modern eyes, was one of Caffa's most lucrative enterprises. Slaves captured in raids across the Russian steppes or purchased from local traders were shipped to markets in Egypt and the Levant, where they served as soldiers, servants, or concubines. This commerce brought immense wealth, but also risk. The volatile politics of the Mongol world, combined with the hazards of war and piracy, made life in the colonies precarious. To protect their interests, the Genoese fortified their settlements and maintained fleets of armed galleys. They also relied on diplomacy, negotiating treaties with Mongol khans and local rulers. The Genoese approach to empire was transactional rather than territorial. They sought to secure favorable conditions for trade rather than impose direct rule. The maone system offered flexibility that few other medieval powers could match. It allowed Genoa to operate as a maritime empire without the burden of a centralized bureaucracy or standing army. The Republic could expand and contract according to the tides of commerce. When a colony became unprofitable or endangered, investors could withdraw, and the commune could simply redirect its energies elsewhere. This adaptive structure helped Genoa endure periods of crisis that might have destroyed a more rigid empire. However, the very success of private colonial governance also deepened inequality and competition within the Republic. The profits of the maona enriched a small circle of families who already dominated Genoa's politics. The Dorias, Spinolas, Grimaldis, and Centuriones became not only local magnates, but global financiers. Their fortunes, built on overseas ventures, allowed them to wield enormous influence at home. The Senate and councils of the commune increasingly reflected the interests of these oligarchs, transforming Genoa into what many historians describe as an aristocratic republic. Despite these tensions, the 14th century remained a period of Genoese confidence and creativity. The city's merchants pioneered financial instruments to support their ventures: transferable shares, insurance policies, and complex partnership contracts that spread risk across investors. Genoese bankers operated in Constantinople, Tunis, and Barcelona, linking the Mediterranean economy through credit and exchange. The Republic's flag, the Red Cross of St. George on a white field, became a familiar sight from Gibraltar to the Crimea. Yet this prosperity existed in the shadow of looming disaster. The interconnectedness that made Genoa wealthy also made it vulnerable. Its ships, sailing constantly between the Black Sea, the Levant, and the Mediterranean, carried not only goods, but also diseases. In the year 1346, as Mongol armies besieged Caffa, a new and terrible force appeared: the plague. Genoese merchants fleeing the siege carried the infection aboard their ships, spreading it to ports across Europe. The pandemic that followed, later known as the Black Death, would decimate populations, disrupt trade, and alter the course of history. In the middle of the 14th century, the Genoese maritime empire reached the height of its geographical reach and financial sophistication. Its colonies spanned from the Black Sea to the Atlantic, its merchants trafficked in goods from Asia and Africa, and its bankers financed kingdoms and crusades. Yet, at the very moment of its greatest prosperity, Genoa unwittingly became the agent of one of the most devastating calamities in human history. The plague that would come to be known as the Black Death first entered Europe through Genoa's far-flung trade networks, traveling aboard the same ships that had carried silk, grain, and spices for generations. The story of how this happened begins in the Genoese colony of Caffa on the Crimean coast of the Black Sea. By the early 1300s and 40s, Caffa was the principal commercial hub of Genoa's Eastern Empire. A bustling port enclosed by strong walls, it was home to thousands of Genoese merchants, artisans, sailors, and their families. The city also hosted a large population of Armenians, Greeks, Tatars, and Jews, reflecting its role as an international marketplace. Under Genoese administration, Caffa flourished as the main link between the Mediterranean and the Mongol-controlled territories of the Golden Horde. Caravans brought furs, slaves, and grain from the vast steppes of Eurasia, while Genoese ships carried European goods eastward and returned westward with precious cargo. This prosperity, however, rested on a fragile political balance. The Mongol Khans, who controlled the hinterland surrounding Caffa, tolerated Genoese trade but distrusted the Republic's growing influence. Periodic disputes over taxes, jurisdiction, and religious differences caused friction between the Genoese colonists and their Tatar overlords. In the early 1300s and 40s, relations deteriorated under the rule of the Mongol leader Janibeg, who sought to reassert his authority over the Crimean ports. In the year 1346, Janibeg's army laid siege to Caffa. The Mongol forces surrounded the city, cutting off its supplies and trade routes. Inside the walls, the Genoese garrison and civilian population endured months of hardship. Yet the defenders held out, protected by Caffa's strong fortifications and by the steady arrival of Genoese ships that managed to break through the blockade. The siege might have ended as one of many such confrontations in the volatile frontier of the Black Sea, had it not been for the appearance of a new and terrifying disease. As the siege dragged on, a strange illness began to spread among the Mongol troops. Chroniclers later described it as a sickness marked by sudden fever, swelling of the lymph nodes, and death within days. Entire camps were struck down. The epidemic, carried by fleas on rats that thrived in the soldiers' grain stores and living quarters, was the bubonic plague, a disease that had smoldered for centuries in Central Asia, but now erupted with unprecedented ferocity. Unable to continue the siege, the Mongols retreated. But before they withdrew, according to later accounts, they attempted a grim act of revenge. Using catapults, they hurled the bodies of their plague victims over the walls of Caffa, hoping to infect the defenders. Whether this account, recorded by the Genoese notary Gabriele de Musi, is literal or symbolic remains debated by historians. What is certain is that the disease soon spread within the city. Panic gripped the population as sickness and death multiplied. When the Genoese realized that Caffa could no longer be held, they boarded their ships and fled across the Black Sea, carrying with them not only survivors and goods, but also the invisible contagion. The plague traveled westward along the same maritime routes that had once carried prosperity. From Caffa, infected ships sailed to Constantinople, Alexandria, and eventually to Genoa itself. In the autumn of 1347, the first plague ships arrived in the Mediterranean. Chroniclers describe scenes of horror as sailors, already dying, brought the infection ashore. In ports such as Messina, Marseille, and finally Genoa, the disease spread with terrifying speed. Within months, it engulfed the entire Italian peninsula, then France, Spain, and England. By the time it reached northern Europe, the plague had become the deadliest pandemic in recorded history. In Genoa, the impact was catastrophic. The same dense urban structure that had supported the Republic's prosperity now turned into a trap. Narrow alleys and crowded houses facilitated contagion, while constant maritime traffic ensured that no quarantine could contain it. Contemporary estimates suggest that in some quarters of the city, more than half the population perished. Entire families vanished, workshops and markets stood silent, and ships lay idle in the harbor. The social consequences were as profound as the demographic collapse. The city's governing institutions faltered as officials died or fled. Priests and physicians worked tirelessly, but superstition and fear spread faster than medicine. Mass graves were dug outside the walls to accommodate the dead, and the sound of church bells tolling for the deceased became a daily rhythm of despair. Trade ground to a halt. The once busy routes that connected Genoa to the Levant and the Black Sea were abandoned as sailors feared infection. Yet, amid the devastation, the Genoese displayed a remarkable capacity for adaptation. When the first wave of plague subsided around 1351, the survivors began to rebuild. The Republic's decentralized economic structure, its reliance on private capital and overseas colonies, proved crucial. While the home population had been decimated, the Genoese presence abroad ensured that commerce could resume. Merchants in Constantinople, Caffa, and Tunis re-established trade links, sending food and supplies to the stricken city. The plague also altered Genoa's social order. Labor shortages raised wages and weakened the rigid hierarchies of the pre-plague era. Many of the great merchant houses suffered losses of heirs and partners, creating opportunities for new families and outsiders to enter the ranks of the elite. The government responded by reforming laws on inheritance and debt, allowing property to change hands more easily and stimulating economic recovery. Internationally, the pandemic disrupted the balance of power in the Mediterranean. Venice, Pisa, and Florence all suffered similar losses, but Genoa's strategic colonies allowed it to recover more quickly. Caffa, despite its initial devastation, was rebuilt and resumed trade within a decade. Its port once again became a vital node in the exchange between Europe and Asia. The Genoese, ever pragmatic, learned to live with the recurring outbreaks of plague that followed, incorporating quarantine measures and new sanitary regulations into their maritime practice. The plague also left a deep imprint on Genoese religion and culture. Many survivors interpreted the disaster as divine punishment, leading to waves of repentance and charitable activity. Wealthy families endowed hospitals, churches, and almshouses as acts of piety and public service. The Church of San Matteo, associated with the Doria family, and the Hospice of Pamatone are among the enduring monuments of this spirit of reconstruction. Art and literature reflected the trauma of mortality, but also the resilience of the human community. On a broader scale, the Black Death changed the direction of Genoa's empire. The The demographic collapse reduced the labor force available for agriculture and shipping, prompting greater reliance on slaves imported from the Black Sea. At the same time, the decline of traditional markets forced merchants to explore new routes and partnerships. Genoa intensified its trade with the Western Mediterranean, including Spain and North Africa, setting the stage for its later involvement in Iberian exploration. The experience of the plague also strengthened Genoa's financial institutions. To fund recovery, the commune consolidated public debt, issuing long-term bonds that were managed by a board of creditors, a precursor to the Banco di San Giorgio, which would later dominate the city's finances. These measures stabilized the economy and ensured that the Republic could continue to finance its fleets and colonies, even in times of crisis. Despite the immense suffering, Genoa's maritime spirit endured. The Republic's sailors and merchants resumed their voyages, driven by necessity and opportunity alike. The ports of the Black Sea reopened, and trade with the Mongol territories resumed under new conditions. But the memory of the plague remained etched in Genoese consciousness as a warning of the fragility of wealth and the unpredictability of fortune. Historians often note that the spread of the Black Death through Genoese trade routes illustrates both the strengths and vulnerabilities of early globalization. The same interconnectedness that enabled unprecedented prosperity also allowed disaster to travel with equal speed. Genoa's empire, built on movement and exchange, could not isolate itself from the forces that crossed its sea lanes. By the middle of the 14th century, Genoa's fortunes had recovered from the devastation of the plague, and its fleets once again ruled the sea lanes of the eastern Mediterranean and the Black Sea. Yet the Republic's prosperity now brought it into direct and unrelenting conflict with its most formidable rival, Venice. The two maritime powers, though similar in structure and ambition, were bound by a rivalry so intense that it would shape the history of the Mediterranean for over a century. This conflict was not a single war, but a series of naval duels fought across generations, each driven by the same underlying struggle: control of the lucrative eastern trade routes that linked Europe to the markets of Asia. While Genoa's influence had grown rapidly after the Treaty of Nymphaeum, Venice had not been idle. The Venetians had built a vast network of colonies and commercial privileges stretching from the Adriatic to Crete, Cyprus, and the Aegean islands. Their merchants dominated the spice and silk trade flowing through Egypt and the Levant, and their alliance with the Byzantine Empire before its fall to the Crusaders had given them a privileged position in Constantinople. When the Genoese re-entered the eastern Mediterranean after helping Emperor Michael VIII Palaiologos restore the Byzantine throne, the two republics found themselves competing for the same ports, allies, and customers. The rivalry first flared into open war in the mid-13th century during the so-called War of St. Saba. The immediate cause was deceptively minor: a dispute over trading privileges in the Crusader kingdom of Acre, where Venetian and Genoese merchants operated neighboring quarters. Tensions escalated after a quarrel between sailors led to violence, drawing in local forces and foreign allies. Genoa allied itself with Pisa and the Kingdom of Sicily, while Venice secured support from the Crusader nobles of Acre and from the Byzantine successor states opposed to Genoa. The conflict soon turned into a full-scale naval war. Battles raged across the Levantine coast, in Cyprus, and in the Aegean Sea. The Genoese navy scored several early victories, but Venice's superior resources and organization gradually turned the tide. In the year 1258, after years of fighting, the Venetians captured the Genoese quarter of Acre, destroying its fortifications and forcing its inhabitants to flee. The loss was a severe blow to Genoa's presence in the Holy Land. Yet even as the city licked its wounds, it learned a crucial lesson. Victory in the Mediterranean depended not only on courage at sea, but also on to maintain supply lines, alliances, and disciplined naval administration. In the following decades, Genoa focused on rebuilding its strength. The Republic's shipyards produced new fleets of powerful galleys, while its merchants secured fresh bases in the Black Sea. when Venice once again sought to expand its influence after the fall of Acre to the Mamluks in 1391, the stage was set for renewed confrontation. The second great conflict between Venice and Genoa erupted in the late 13th century and lasted into the early 14th. This time, the struggle extended beyond the Levant to encompass the entire eastern Mediterranean, from Constantinople to the Adriatic. The Genoese, drawing strength from their colonies in the Black Sea and their alliance with the restored Byzantine Empire, sought to challenge Venetian supremacy in Crete and the Aegean. The Venetians, for their part, feared encirclement and struck first, attacking Genoese shipping wherever it could be found. Naval warfare in this era was both brutal and highly technical. Genoese galleys were renowned for their speed and maneuverability, while Venetian ships were heavier but sturdier. Battles often lasted for hours, sometimes even days, as fleets grappled in close quarters. Soldiers fought hand-to-hand with crossbows, pikes, and swords, while engineers hurled incendiary missiles and stones from shipborne catapults. Commanders such as Andrea Doria, Pietro Zeno, and Pietro Gradenigo became legendary figures, their victories and defeats sung in the ports of both republics. Despite numerous engagements, neither side achieved decisive supremacy. The wars strained both republics financially and politically. Genoa's oligarchic factions, the Dorias, Spinolas, and Grimaldis, quarreled over the direction of foreign policy, while in Venice the Senate debated whether continued warfare was worth the cost. The two cities often signed temporary truces, only for new incidents to reignite hostilities. Trade, paradoxically, continued even during war. Venetian and Genoese merchants sometimes met in neutral ports to exchange goods under flags of truce, a reminder that profit could survive even in times of bloodshed. The most dramatic phase of the rivalry came in the latter half of the 14th century, culminating in the War of Chioggia. This final confrontation, fought between 1378 and 1381, brought both republics to the brink of annihilation. The conflict began over competition in the Adriatic and Eastern Mediterranean, but soon escalated into an existential struggle for dominance. At the outset, Genoa appeared poised for victory. The Republic's fleet, commanded by Pietro Doria, launched a daring assault deep into Venetian waters. In 1379, the Genoese captured the Venetian stronghold of Chioggia, a fortified port only a short distance from Venice itself. The fall of Chioggia sent shockwaves across Europe. For the first time, Venice faced the prospect of invasion and destruction. The Genoese fleet anchored in the lagoon, blockading the city and threatening to starve it into submission. But the Venetians, led by the seasoned Admiral Vetter Pisani and the charismatic Carlo Zeno, refused to surrender. In a desperate counteroffensive, they trapped the Genoese fleet inside Chioggia by blocking the channels leading to the open sea. The siege lasted through the winter, with both sides suffering from hunger and disease. When reinforcements failed to arrive, the Genoese were forced to capitulate in June of 1381. The Peace of Turin, signed later that year under the mediation of the Count of Savoy, ended the war, but left both republics exhausted. Venice had survived while Genoa had been dealt a humiliating defeat. Thousands of Genoese sailors and soldiers were taken prisoner, and the city's reputation as the invincible power of the seas was shaken. Yet, even in defeat, Genoa's spirit remained unbroken. The Republic's merchants continued to operate in the Black Sea and Western Mediterranean, and its bankers soon found new ways to project influence through finance rather than force. The long century of conflict between Venice and Genoa had profound consequences for both states and for the Mediterranean world. It drained resources, destroyed fleets, and disrupted trade, but it also spurred technological and administrative innovation. Genoese shipwrights refined the design of galleys, improving their efficiency and speed. Venetian dockyards developed new systems for mass production and repair, setting standards that would influence naval architecture for centuries. Both republics improved their systems of maritime law, codifying rules for contracts, cargo insurance, and the treatment of prisoners at sea. Culturally, the rivalry left deep scars, but also fostered mutual respect. Venetian chroniclers admired Genoese courage, while Genoese writers acknowledged Venetian discipline. Each city learned from the other. Genoa adopted elements of Venice's administrative efficiency, while Venice borrowed aspects of Genoa's financial ingenuity. Together, they shaped a distinct Mediterranean model of maritime republics, urban states driven by commerce, governed by councils, and sustained by naval power. For Genoa, the aftermath of the War of Chioggia marked a turning point. The republic's focus gradually shifted from military conquest to financial influence. Its bankers, already active in funding European monarchies, expanded their operations across the continent. The experience of prolonged warfare had demonstrated that wealth could achieve what arms could not. While Venice retained naval supremacy, Genoa increasingly became the banker of empires, a transformation that would define its next era. In the wake of the exhausting wars with Venice, Genoa entered a new phase of its history, an age defined not by naval battles or colonial conquest, but by finance. The republic that had once commanded fleets across the Mediterranean began to discover that money, properly managed, could serve as an even more potent instrument of power than the sword. The foundation of the Banco di San Giorgio, or Bank of St. George, marked this transformation. Through it, Genoa reinvented itself as the financial nerve center of Europe, pioneering economic practices that anticipated the modern banking system. The story of the Banco di San Giorgio began in the early 15th century, at a time when the city's political and economic systems were under strain. Decades of warfare, internal factionalism, and costly colonial ventures had left the commune deeply in debt. The Republic's treasury could no longer rely solely on taxation or spoils from war to fund its obligations. The government owed large sums to its own citizens, merchants, shipowners, and nobles, who had financed fleets and fortifications in exchange for bonds known as luoghi and compare. These bonds promised repayment through future tax revenues, but the state's frequent crises made repayment uncertain. To address this unsustainable situation, Genoa's leading creditors proposed a radical solution. Rather than waiting for the government to repay its debts piecemeal, they would collectively manage the revenues themselves. In the year 1407, the Banco di San Giorgio was established as a public-private institution, owned and operated by the Republic's creditors, but formally recognized by the state. It was named after the city's patron saint, whose cross had long symbolized Genoa's ships and banners. The creation of the bank represented an extraordinary act of civic pragmatism. The government effectively transferred the management of many of its tax revenues, customs duties, and colonial profits to the bank's administrators in exchange for debt relief. The Banco di San Giorgio thus became both a financial institution and a quasi-governmental body. Its directors, known as protettori, were drawn from the city's most powerful families, including the Doria, Spinola, and Grimaldi lineages. They operated with a degree of independence from the political councils of the commune, ensuring stability and continuity in financial affairs, even during periods of political turmoil. What made the Banco di San Giorgio remarkable was the scope of its functions. It was not merely a depository for state funds. It acted as a central bank, a clearinghouse, and a colonial administrator all at once. Citizens could deposit money, transfer payments, and finance commercial ventures through its accounts. The bank issued credit and facilitated exchange between merchants across the Mediterranean, using written orders that anticipated the modern concept of bank transfers. Its ledgers recorded transactions in meticulous detail, setting a standard for accounting and record-keeping that influenced financial institutions across Europe. Perhaps most innovative was the bank's role in managing territories. When the Genoese government was unable to meet its financial obligations, it assigned the revenues of certain colonies or districts to the bank as collateral. The Banco di San Giorgio thus assumed direct administrative control over several possessions, including Corsica, parts of the Black Sea colonies, and even regions within Liguria. Governors appointed by the bank collected taxes, maintained order, and reported to the Board of Protettori. In effect, the bank became a state within a state, a corporation that governed lands, commanded fleets, and wielded both fiscal and political authority. The bank's influence extended far beyond Genoa's borders. Its financial stability and reputation for integrity attracted foreign clients, including monarchs and popes. During the 15th century, the Banco di San Giorgio provided credit to the Kingdom of Aragon, the Duchy of Milan, and the Papal States. The facility with which Genoese bankers moved funds across Europe made them indispensable to rulers who sought to wage wars or finance diplomacy without relying on unstable domestic revenues. The most famous of these arrangements came later in the 16th century, when Genoese financiers became the primary bankers of the Spanish Empire. But the foundations of that dominance were laid in the 15th century through the institutional strength and credibility built by the Banco di San Giorgio. The Genoese had learned that financial trust, once established, could project power as effectively as any fleet. Domestically, the bank reshaped Genoa's social and political landscape. The concentration of capital in its hands empowered the creditor class, reinforcing the oligarchic nature of the republic. Wealthy families who held shares in the bank wielded immense influence over both economic and political life. Yet, unlike the violent factionalism that had plagued earlier centuries, this financial elite had a vested interest in stability. They required peace, predictable governance, and secure trade routes to protect their investments. In this sense, the Banco di San Giorgio acted as a moderating force, curbing the city's old habits of civil strife. The bank's headquarters became a symbol of Genoa's identity as a city of commerce and calculation. Its grand loggia, adorned with the emblem of St. George slaying the dragon, stood near the harbor, a reminder that Genoa's new conquests were not of territory, but of finance. Within its walls, clerks and notaries worked tirelessly, recording deposits, loans, and transfers that linked Genoa to every corner of the Mediterranean. The hum of activity inside the bank replaced the roar of galleys as the heartbeat of the Republic. The success of the Banco di San Giorgio also influenced the development of financial institutions elsewhere in Europe. Its methods of consolidating public debt, issuing transferable shares, and maintaining transparent accounts inspired imitation in Florence, Venice, and later in Amsterdam and London. Modern historians often regard it as one of the earliest examples of a proto-central bank, centuries before the establishment of national banking systems. Yet, Genoa's transformation into a financial republic did not mean the disappearance of its maritime character. The profits generated by the bank and its shareholders continued to support shipping, trade, and exploration. Genoese merchants financed voyages across the Mediterranean and into the Atlantic, collaborating with Iberian partners in ventures to the Canary Islands, Madeira, and eventually beyond. The skills honed in the counting houses of Genoa found new application in managing the risks of global commerce. The 15th century also brought a measure of cultural flourishing to Genoa. Wealth from banking and trade financed art, architecture, and learning. Palaces rose along the Strada Nuova, adorned with frescoes and marble facades that displayed both civic pride and private opulence. Artists such as Giovanni Battista Murano and later Rubens would immortalize these buildings in their paintings. The Republic's commitment to public works and charity, sustained by the revenues of the Banco di San Giorgio, ensured that prosperity was accompanied by civic responsibility. Still, the concentration of wealth and power in the hands of the bank's directors also provoked criticism. Some citizens feared that the Banco di San Giorgio had become too powerful, overshadowing the elected councils of the commune. Satirists and chroniclers warned that Genoa risked becoming a plutocracy ruled by accountants rather than patriots. Yet even these critics acknowledged that without the bank's discipline and resources, the city would have long since collapsed under the weight of its debts. The strength of the Banco di San Giorgio was tested repeatedly by external pressures. French invasions, shifting alliances, and the rise of new powers such as the Ottoman Empire threatened Genoa's trade networks. Yet the bank's careful management and international connections allowed the Republic to survive where others faltered. Its ability to shift capital across borders, to finance allies, and to negotiate with conquerors gave Genoa remarkable resilience. When other states fell into ruin, Genoa adapted, using finance as both shield and weapon. By the 15th century, Genoa had already transformed itself from a martial republic of galleys into a financial power whose influence extended across Europe. The establishment of the Banco di San Giorgio had given the city stability, credit, and confidence. Yet Genoese ambition was never confined to the Mediterranean. As new oceanic routes began to emerge in the western seas, Genoese merchants and financiers were among the first Italians to seize the opportunity. Their ships, capital, and expertise became essential to the early expansion of the Atlantic world, laying the groundwork for what would later be known as the Age of Discovery. In this new phase, Genoa's wealth was no longer anchored solely in its traditional colonies or the Levantine spice trade. Instead, it flowed through a network of partnerships with the Iberian kingdoms, Portugal and Castile, that were beginning to explore beyond the familiar boundaries of Europe. Genoese merchants, long experienced in managing risk, financing voyages, and organizing large-scale enterprises, became indispensable to these ventures. They provided what the Iberians lacked: the financial systems, navigational experience, and maritime organization that centuries of Mediterranean commerce had refined. The connection between Genoa and the Iberian world had been building for generations. Genoese trading colonies had existed on the Iberian Peninsula since the 12th century, and Genoese bankers had long managed the accounts of Aragonese and Castilian rulers. By the 15th century, these relationships deepened into full collaboration. The Genoese were drawn westward by two great incentives: the Atlantic trade in sugar and slaves, and the emerging promise of voyages that reached beyond the known world. The first major Genoese ventures in the Atlantic were tied to the island economies of the eastern Atlantic: Madeira, the Canary Islands, and later, the Azores. These islands, colonized by Portuguese and Castilian settlers, became centers for a crop that was transforming European tastes: sugar. The cultivation of sugarcane required immense capital investment: land, mills, labor, and shipping. Few Iberian nobles had the resources or expertise to manage such enterprises, but Genoese investors did. They brought with them a tradition of organizing collective financing, honed through the maona system and the Banco di San Giorgio, and adapted it to the plantation economy. Genoese capital financed the building of sugar mills in Madeira and the Canary Islands. Genoese engineers designed the machinery, while their merchants managed export logistics and trade insurance. The Republic's ships carried sugar to markets in Venice, Florence, and Flanders, where the refined crystals fetched high prices. In this way, Genoa became one of the first European powers to profit from what would later evolve into the transatlantic plantation system. However, the success of these ventures depended not only on technology and trade, but also on labor. The sugar plantations required a constant supply of workers, and this demand led to the expansion of the slave trade along the Atlantic coast of Africa. Genoese merchants, already familiar with the slave routes of the Black Sea, were quick to adapt. They collaborated with Portuguese traders who had begun to explore the coast of Guinea, purchasing captives and transporting them to the Atlantic islands. Though the Genoese did not initiate the African slave trade, their financial expertise and maritime infrastructure helped institutionalize it as a key component of the early Atlantic economy. In many ways, the 15th century represented a period of outward reinvention for Genoa. The city itself was no longer the center of empire in the old sense. Instead, its people became the silent partners and financial architects of other nations' empires. Genoese merchants in Seville, Lisbon, and Valencia operated banks, warehouses, and trading houses that funneled wealth back to Liguria. The Republic's own government, while less involved in overseas ventures than in earlier centuries, benefited indirectly through taxes, remittances, and the continued prestige of its citizens abroad. Genoa's role in Iberian expansion was not merely economic, it was also technological. The experience accumulated over centuries of Mediterranean navigation contributed to the development of the caravel, the light and maneuverable vessel that became the workhorse of Atlantic exploration. Genoese shipbuilders had long experimented with hybrid designs that combined the oared galley with the sailing ship, optimizing for speed and endurance. Their innovations influenced Iberian shipyards and helped make possible the long voyages that would eventually reach Africa and the Americas. The 15th century also saw a subtle but profound cultural transformation within Genoa itself. The city's elite, enriched by banking and trade, invested heavily in art, learning, and architecture. Palaces rose along the Via Nuova, decorated with frescoes celebrating both classical virtues and maritime achievements. The Republic's patron saint, St. George, remained a symbol of civic unity. But beneath the religious imagery lay a new faith in commerce, calculation, and progress. Wealth from Atlantic ventures helped fund this urban renewal, linking the prosperity of distant plantations to the marble facades of Genoa's Renaissance skyline. While the city thrived, its political life remained complex. Genoa had always balanced precariously between independence and dependence on stronger powers. Throughout the 15th century, it oscillated between alliances with France and the Duchy of Milan, occasionally falling under the control of one or the other. These fluctuations reflected both the weakness of the city's political institutions and the strength of its economic elite, who often preferred foreign protectors to domestic instability. The Banco di San Giorgio continued to act as a stabilizing force, ensuring that financial continuity persisted even when political authority changed hands. Despite this instability, Genoese influence in the wider world continued to grow. Its merchants were now part of a globalizing economy that reached from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, from North Africa to Northern Europe. The city's financiers supplied credit to Portuguese expeditions along the African coast and insured the cargoes of Castilian fleets. Genoa's merchants, operating through Iberian intermediaries, were thus indirectly involved in the first European ventures into what would later become the New World. The blending of Genoese and Iberian enterprise was embodied in figures like Antonio de Noli, a Genoese navigator who explored the Cape Verde Islands in Portuguese service, and Eustachio di Monte, who helped establish trading links along the African coast. These men were not agents of the Republic itself, but representatives of its maritime tradition. A network of skilled sailors, financiers, and entrepreneurs whose allegiance was to commerce rather than to flag. The sugar trade, meanwhile, continued to flourish. By the latter half of the 15th century, Genoese merchants controlled much of the refining and export from Madeira and the Canaries. Sugar was shipped in bulk to Antwerp and Bruges, where Genoese trading houses dominated distribution. This commerce laid the foundations for later capitalist systems of production and finance, foreshadowing the global networks of the modern age. The Atlantic ventures also introduced Genoa to new materials and ideas. Exotic goods such as gold dust, ivory, and tropical woods entered the Mediterranean markets through Genoese hands. These commodities enriched not only the merchants, but also the craftsmen and artists who transformed them into luxury goods for European elites. The Republic's culture, once purely Mediterranean, began to reflect a broader global sensibility. By the closing years of the 15th century, the Genoese Republic had already reshaped its destiny from a martial maritime state to a dispersed web of financiers, navigators, and merchants. Its ships still crossed the Mediterranean, but its greatest sons were now sailing under foreign flags, carrying Genoa's maritime genius far beyond the narrow confines of Europe. Among them, none would become more famous or more symbolic of Genoa's legacy than Christopher Columbus, the navigator whose vision of sailing westward across the Atlantic would connect two worlds and mark the dawn of a global age. Though his voyage was undertaken for Spain, his origins, training, and mindset were deeply Genoese. In him, the spirit of the Ligurian seafarers, their boldness, calculation, and faith in the sea, found its ultimate expression. Columbus was born in the year 1451 in the district of San Stefano, within the Republic of Genoa. His father, Domenico Colombo, was a wool weaver, and his family belonged to the artisan class rather than the merchant aristocracy. Yet in Genoa, the sea touched every life. Even craftsmen's sons grew up hearing tales of distant voyages, of wealth earned in foreign ports, and of families who rose from humble beginnings to prosperity through maritime trade. Columbus's early environment was steeped in this culture of enterprise and movement. From an early age, Columbus learned the basics of navigation and map-making. Genoa's educational system emphasized practical mathematics, geometry, measurement, and accounting, all essential for commerce. The city's archives, full of notarial contracts and shipping records, were living textbooks of global exchange. Columbus, ambitious and curious, absorbed this world eagerly. By his adolescence, he was already sailing aboard merchant vessels that traded across the Mediterranean, carrying goods between Genoa, Chios, and Tunis. The 15th century was a time of rapid change in maritime technology and geographical understanding. Genoese and Venetian cartographers were among the most advanced in Europe, producing detailed charts that combined classical knowledge with new observations from recent voyages. These maps circulated widely, and Columbus, like many young sailors, studied them intensely. He was fascinated by the writings of earlier scholars such as Paolo Toscanelli, who argued that Asia could be reached by sailing west across the Atlantic. In an era when the old boundaries of the known world were collapsing, such ideas found receptive minds among the Genoese, whose entire history had been built on challenging the limits of the sea. In his 20s, Columbus left his native city for the wider world of Iberian commerce. He settled first in Portugal, where Genoese merchants had long been active in the Atlantic trade. Portugal at the time was the most dynamic maritime power in Europe, sending ships along the coast of Africa in search of gold, slaves, and a sea route to India. Genoese financiers and navigators were integral to these enterprises. They managed accounts, built ships, and advised the Portuguese crown on navigation and logistics. Columbus, arriving in this milieu, found himself surrounded by fellow Ligurians who had already adapted to the Atlantic age. In Lisbon, Columbus married Filipa Moniz Perestrello, the daughter of a Portuguese nobleman who had served as governor of Porto Santo in the Madeira Islands. Through this marriage, Columbus gained access to the navigational charts and logbooks of Atlantic sailors. He began to study the winds, currents, and distances of the western seas. He learned about the steady trade winds that blew from the northeast and the countercurrents that returned ships from the Caribbean. Gradually, he came to believe that by sailing west from Europe, a navigator could reach the rich markets of Asia faster than by the long route around Africa. The idea of reaching Asia by sailing west was not entirely new, but few had the conviction or the daring to attempt it. Columbus, however, was persistent. His Genoese upbringing had instilled in him a blend of courage and calculation, a willingness to take enormous risks grounded in careful reasoning. He spent years seeking patronage for his plan. When the Portuguese crown declined his proposal, he turned to the neighboring kingdom of Castile, where Queen Isabella and King Ferdinand were completing the Reconquista and seeking new paths to wealth and glory. In the year 1492, after years of negotiation and rejection, Columbus finally secured royal support. The capitulations of Santa Fe granted him the title of Admiral of the Ocean Sea and promised him a share of the profits from any lands he discovered. With 3 small ships, the Niña, the Pinta, and the Santa Maria, Columbus set sail from Palos de la Frontera in August of that year. On board were sailors drawn from Andalusia, Galicia, and the Ligurian coast, many of them veterans of Mediterranean navigation. The voyage, though conducted under Spanish sponsorship, bore the unmistakable imprint of Genoese expertise. When Columbus sighted land on the 12th day of October, an island in the Bahamas, he believed he had reached the eastern edge of Asia. In truth, he had encountered a new world entirely unknown to Europe. His subsequent voyages revealed the vastness of this discovery, though he never fully understood the scope of what he had achieved. To his contemporaries, however, the implications were immediate. The balance of global commerce was shifting from the Mediterranean to the Atlantic, and the world itself had become larger. For Genoa, Columbus's success was both a source of pride and a symbol of transformation. The city had not sponsored his voyage, yet his achievement reflected centuries of Genoese innovation and daring. The techniques he used, careful record-keeping, systematic observation, and reliance on skilled navigators, were products of the Mediterranean trading tradition that Genoa had perfected. In a sense, Columbus carried Genoa's maritime legacy across the ocean, even as the city itself remained anchored in Europe. The discovery of the Americas altered the course of world history, but it also reshaped Genoa's role within it. As Spain and Portugal carved vast colonial empires, Genoese financiers became their indispensable partners. The same families that had once managed the Banco di San Giorgio now turned their expertise toward financing transatlantic expeditions, equipping fleets, and managing royal debts. Genoese bankers in Seville and Madrid handled the flow of silver from the New World, converting it into the credit and capital that sustained the Spanish monarchy. Columbus's voyage thus marked the beginning of a new Genoese empire, an empire of finance intertwined with global exploration. While the Republic itself no longer ruled distant colonies, its citizens controlled the economic mechanisms that made those colonies profitable. The Genoese had discovered a new kind of maritime power, one that no longer required armies or galleys, but operated through contracts, loans, and networks of trust that spanned oceans. Culturally, the connection between Genoa and the Americas endured. The city celebrated Columbus as a native son who had extended its maritime genius to the ends of the earth. Statues, churches, and civic ceremonies commemorated his voyages. Yet behind the celebration lay a recognition of loss as well. The awareness that Genoa's own days as a naval superpower were over. The age of oceanic empires now belonged to Spain and Portugal, and later to nations even farther north. Genoa's future would lie not in exploration, but in financing it. The 16th century would bring this transformation to its height. Genoese bankers, operating through the great fairs of Besançon and Piacenza, became the principal creditors of the Spanish crown. Their financial networks linked Madrid to Antwerp, Lyon, and Genoa itself. Silver from the mines of Potosi and Zacatecas passed through their hands, converted into bills of exchange that fueled the European economy. The Republic that had once conquered the seas through force now ruled them through finance. As the 16th century dawned, Genoa stood at a crossroads. The old medieval republic, once defined by galleys, colonies, and crusades, had become a city of bankers and brokers, an indispensable financial hub of European power. Yet politically, the city was unstable, torn by factionalism and foreign domination. The late 15th century had seen Genoa fall repeatedly under the influence of France and the Duchy of Milan. Its independence was fragile, its government fractured by rival noble factions. Into this chaos stepped a figure whose leadership would restore Genoa's autonomy and align it with the mightiest empire of the age. Andrea Doria, the admiral, statesman, and reformer who redefined the Republic's destiny. Andrea Doria was born in the year 1466 into one of Genoa's most prominent aristocratic families. Though of noble lineage, he inherited little wealth and made his fortune through military service. In his youth, he served as a mercenary soldier and then as a naval commander, fighting in the complex wars that engulfed Italy at the turn of the 16th century. The Italian peninsula was the battlefield of Europe's great powers, France, Spain, and the Holy Roman Empire, all seeking to control its wealthy cities and strategic coasts. For Genoa, caught between these forces, survival required both diplomacy and military skill. Doria's early career reflected the shifting alliances of the era. He first served under the French crown, commanding fleets against the Turks and Barbary corsairs. His mastery of naval tactics quickly earned him respect across the Mediterranean. Yet, despite his service to France, Doria's loyalty remained to his native city. When French interference in Genoese politics grew intolerable, he turned against his employers. In the year 1528, Doria made a fateful decision. He allied himself with Emperor Charles V, ruler of Spain, the Holy Roman Empire, and much of the New World. With imperial backing, Doria returned to Genoa at the head of his fleet and drove out the French garrison. The liberation of the city was swift and decisive. Crowds hailed him as a savior, but instead of seizing power for himself, Doria chose a different path. He restored the Republic, reorganized its government, and laid the foundations for a new political order that would endure for nearly 2 centuries. The constitutional reform of 1528, crafted under Doria's guidance, transformed Genoa into an oligarchic yet stable republic. Power was distributed among the city's noble families through a carefully balanced system of councils. The ancient feuds between the old nobles, the traditional aristocracy, and the new nobles, wealthy merchant families who had risen in later centuries, were formally reconciled. Doria divided political offices equally between the two groups, preventing either faction from dominating. At the same time, he created the office of Doge, an elected head of state who served for a fixed term rather than for life. This arrangement combined continuity with accountability, ensuring that no individual could establish a permanent dictatorship. Doria himself refused the title of Doge, preferring to remain Captain General of the Republic. From his palace overlooking the harbor, he guided Genoa's foreign policy and defended its interests, but he did so in the name of the state, not personal ambition. His leadership embodied a new kind of power, one based on influence and prestige rather than formal authority. Under Doria's direction, Genoa entered a period of remarkable stability and prosperity, often referred to as the Century of the Genoese. The alliance with Spain proved the cornerstone of this transformation. By aligning itself with the Habsburg Empire, Genoa secured protection from foreign invasion and access to the vast wealth of Spain's global dominions. Doria's fleet became an integral part of the imperial navy, patrolling the Mediterranean against Ottoman expansion and North African corsairs. In return, the Spanish crown granted Genoese merchants and bankers extraordinary privileges. The partnership between Genoa and Spain was not one of subservience, but of mutual advantage. While Spain provided military might, Genoa provided the financial machinery that sustained it. The Banco di San Giorgio and private Genoese houses extended credit to the Spanish monarchy, funding wars in Italy, Flanders, and beyond. Genoese bankers handled the immense flows of silver arriving from the Americas, converting bullion into usable capital through bills of exchange. In this arrangement, Doria acted as the political bridge between the two powers, ensuring that Genoa's autonomy was preserved even as it served imperial interests. Doria's naval campaigns further elevated his reputation. In 1531, he led a combined Genoese and Spanish fleet against the Ottoman Turks, capturing the strategic city of Coron in the Peloponnese. 2 years later, he defeated the fleet of Hayreddin Barbarossa, the most feared corsair of the age, at the Battle of Preveza. Although the victory was incomplete, it checked Ottoman dominance in the Western Mediterranean and cemented Doria's status as Europe's foremost admiral. His ships became symbols of Genoa's resurgence, their red and white cross of St. George once again commanding respect on the high seas. At home, Doria's rule brought not only peace, but also reform. He reorganized the city's judiciary, modernized the navy, and oversaw public works that transformed Genoa's harbor and fortifications. The city's palaces and churches were renovated, and new institutions for education and charity were established. Doria's personal wealth, augmented by imperial subsidies and private trade, was immense, but he invested much of it in his homeland. His magnificent Palazzo del Principe, built on the western edge of the city, became a symbol of Genoa's renewed grandeur. The cultural flourishing that accompanied this political stability was striking. The mid-16th century saw the rise of a Genoese Renaissance. Artists such as Perino del Vaga, a pupil of Raphael, decorated Doria's palace with frescoes celebrating naval victories and civic virtue. The city's merchant families, enriched by banking and trade, commissioned art from the leading painters of the time and filled their palaces with treasures from across the world. Genoa's skyline, with its marble facades and domed churches, reflected a blend of austerity and opulence, a visual expression of a city that was both deeply conservative and immensely wealthy. Yet beneath this golden surface lay the contradictions of Doria's regime. While his reforms ended the chaos of earlier centuries, they also entrenched oligarchic rule. The balance between old and new nobles reduced overt factional violence but froze political mobility. Power circulated among a limited group of families, and the broader population had little say in government. Doria's cautious foreign policy, designed to preserve peace and protect Genoa's alliance with Spain, sometimes frustrated those who longed for a return to the city's independent adventures at sea. Nonetheless, the system he created endured precisely because it reflected Genoa's reality. The city no longer possessed the population or military power to compete with the great empires of Europe. Its survival depended on neutrality, finance, and diplomacy. Doria's genius was to recognize this and to craft a republic suited to the new global age, a state that would thrive through prudence rather than conquest. In his later years, Andrea Doria remained the guiding figure of Genoese politics, even as age and infirmity limited his activity. He continued to command fleets when necessary, most notably during the wars against France and the Ottomans in the 1550s. Foreign monarchs, including Emperor Charles V and King Philip II, consulted him as an equal. His authority was personal yet constitutional, rooted in respect rather than coercion. Doria died in 1560 at the remarkable age of 94, leaving behind a republic that was stable, respected, and prosperous. His funeral was a national event, attended by nobles, merchants, and sailors alike. The republic mourned not merely a man, but an era, the restoration of Genoese independence and the birth of a new kind of power founded on alliance and finance. When Andrea Doria's reforms stabilized Genoa in the early 16th century, he did more than restore civic order. He prepared the city for a new kind of empire, one built not on territory, but on credit. In the decades after his death, Genoa entered what historians have called the century of the Genoese, a period when the Republic's bankers became the financial engine of the Spanish Empire and, by extension, of Europe itself. The small Ligurian city, hemmed between mountains and sea, became the invisible capital of early modern finance. While other powers wielded armies, Genoa controlled the flow of silver, debt, and credit that sustained them. The foundation for this dominance had been laid by the Banco di San Giorgio in the 15th century, but it was during the 16th century that Genoese financial ingenuity reached its zenith. The alliance with Spain, cemented under Andrea Doria, opened vast opportunities. Spain's empire stretched from Naples to the Netherlands, from Mexico to Peru. Its armies and administrators required a constant influx of funds, often far greater than what the Spanish treasury could immediately provide. Genoese financiers stepped in to bridge the gap, creating a system that transformed war, trade, and government. The heart of this system was the asiento, a contract by which Genoese bankers advanced money to the Spanish crown in return for repayment with interest, often secured by revenues from the Americas. These agreements were the financial lifeblood of the Habsburg monarchy. When Spain needed to pay soldiers in Flanders, fund fleets in the Atlantic, or maintain its bureaucracy across continents, it turned to Genoa. The Republic's financiers, operating through family networks that stretched from Madrid to Antwerp, handled the complex logistics of transferring money across Europe. Central to this network was the Spinola family, whose members managed enormous loans to the Spanish crown. Alongside them stood the Grimaldi, Centurioni, and Doria families, each maintaining their own banking houses. These families formed syndicates to share risks and profits, much like the earlier Maon corporations that had governed Genoa's colonies. Their reach extended to every major European financial center: Seville, where American silver arrived; Antwerp, where trade and credit intersected; and Milan, where Spain's Italian armies were based. The mechanics of Genoese finance were sophisticated. Because transporting bullion across war-torn Europe was perilous, the bankers developed intricate systems of credit transfer using bills of exchange. A Genoese merchant in Madrid could issue a bill to a counterpart in Antwerp, who would pay the specified sum to a third party, balancing the books without any physical movement of gold. This network of paper transactions, backed by trust and reputation, allowed money to flow invisibly across the continent. It was an early form of international banking, centuries ahead of modern financial systems. Spain's reliance on Genoa became total. The enormous influx of silver from the mines of Potosi and Zacatecas enriched the Spanish monarchy, but it passed almost immediately into Genoese hands. The silver was shipped to Seville, sold to Genoese bankers, and then converted into credit used to pay troops and fund campaigns. The Republic thus became the central clearinghouse for the global flow of precious metal. Historian Fernand Braudel later described Genoa as the brain of the Spanish Empire, a small, calculating intelligence that directed the movements of vast imperial resources. The relationship between Genoa and Spain was symbiotic but unequal. The Genoese provided credit at favorable terms, but they also wielded immense leverage. When the Spanish treasury defaulted, as it did repeatedly in the late 16th century, the bankers negotiated new agreements that preserved their long-term interests. They could afford temporary losses because their profits from exchange rates, commissions, and insurance were enormous. The Republic's wealth grew so great that contemporaries referred to it as the Bank of Kings. This unprecedented prosperity transformed Genoese society. The palaces that rose along the Strada Nuova, later known as the Via Garibaldi, were built during this period of financial triumph. These grand residences, constructed by families like the Doria, Spinola, and Grimaldi, became symbols of a new aristocracy rooted not in land or arms, but in credit and commerce. Architects such as Galeazzo Alessi designed these palaces to impress visiting dignitaries, including Spanish viceroys and ambassadors. Inside, frescoes depicted scenes of naval victories and biblical virtue, merging piety with pride. The wealth that flowed through Genoa also nourished art and culture. Painters like Luca Cambiaso and Bernardo Strozzi flourished under the patronage of banking dynasties. The Republic's churches, especially the Cathedral of San Lorenzo, were adorned with marble, silver, and fine paintings imported from Flanders and Spain. The city's artistic style, elegant yet restrained, reflected its peculiar position as both financier and servant of empire. Genoa's nobility saw themselves as stewards of divine order, maintaining the balance of wealth and faith in a volatile age. However, the city's financial power came at a cost. The Republic's economy became increasingly detached from production and trade, focusing instead on speculative finance. Genoese merchants still engaged in commerce, but their profits were dwarfed by those of the bankers. This concentration of wealth deepened social inequality. A small number of patrician families controlled most of the city's capital, while artisans, sailors, and laborers saw little benefit from the Republic's global riches. Yet this oligarchy, disciplined and pragmatic, managed to avoid the kind of revolutionary upheaval that plagued other Italian cities. Politically, Genoa remained stable under the Dorian constitution. The Doge, elected for 2 years, presided over a complex web of councils dominated by the noble class. The Banco di San Giorgio continued to administer the city's finances and colonial holdings, including the island of Corsica, which remained under its authority. Although the Republic was technically independent, its foreign policy was closely aligned with Spain. Genoese galleys often sailed under the imperial flag, and Genoese captains commanded fleets in the Mediterranean campaigns against the Ottomans. The connection between finance and empire reached its peak under King Philip II of Spain. During his long reign, Genoese bankers managed nearly every major financial transaction of the monarchy. The Republic became the central hub of the Piacenza fairs, periodic gatherings where bankers met to settle accounts, exchange currencies, and negotiate new asientos. These fairs, held several times each year, were the lifeblood of the European financial system. The credit created there sustained not only Spain's armies, but also the broader economy of Christendom. Yet, dependence on Spain also exposed Genoa to risk. The 17th century brought a series of financial crises as Spain's imperial overstretch became unsustainable. The costs of endless wars in the Netherlands, Italy, and the Americas drained the royal treasury. Despite the steady flow of silver, inflation eroded Spain's revenues, and its repeated bankruptcies damaged Genoa's profits. The Great Default of 1575, followed by others in 1596 and 1607, sent shockwaves through the Republic's banking community. The Genoese responded with characteristic pragmatism. They diversified their investments, lending to other European powers such as France and the Papal States. They also strengthened their domestic institutions. The Banco di San Giorgio took over more direct control of Corsica and other territories, ensuring steady income streams. Genoa's resilience lay in its adaptability. Even as empires rose and fell, the Republic's financiers found new ways to profit from instability. Despite these adjustments, the tide was turning. By the early 17th century, Genoa's influence began to wane. The financial center of Europe was shifting northward to Amsterdam, where the Dutch East India Company and the Bank of Amsterdam introduced new models of capitalism and global trade. The Genoese, though still respected, could not match the Dutch in maritime capacity or colonial organization. Their wealth remained vast, but their role as Europe's bankers gradually diminished. Still, the legacy of the Genoese financial age was profound. The systems they created, the use of transferable credit, international finance networks, and government bonds, became the foundation of modern capitalism. Their quiet corridors of marble and ink had replaced the battlefields of empire as the true arenas of power. By the dawn of the 17th century, Genoa's proud towers and palaces glittered as they never had before. Its aristocracy lived in comfort, its churches gleamed with marble and silver, and its bankers still whispered across Europe's corridors of power. Yet, behind this facade of stability, the foundations of Genoese prosperity had begun to shift. The world around the Republic was changing, and the balance of power that had favored its discrete empire of finance was crumbling. As Spain weakened, France rose. As the Mediterranean lost importance, the Atlantic surged. In this new world, Genoa, once the master of trade routes and credit flows, found itself struggling to preserve its independence and relevance. The 17th century opened with the Republic still tied firmly to its long-standing alliance with Spain. This relationship, forged under Andrea Doria and enriched during the century of the Genoese, had brought wealth and protection. Yet Spain was no longer the invincible empire of Charles V. Its economy sagged under the burden of war, and its treasure fleets from the Americas could no longer offset the costs of maintaining far-flung dominions. For Genoa, whose fortunes had been built on Spanish solvency, this decline was catastrophic. Each bankruptcy declared by the Spanish crown sent tremors through Genoa's banking houses, undermining confidence and draining capital. The city's political order, though stable on the surface, was ossified. The constitution Doria had established in the previous century still governed, dividing power between the old and new noble families. The Doge remained the ceremonial head of state, elected for a 2-year term, while real authority rested with the Senate and the Banco di San Giorgio. Yet this very system of governance, so effective in preserving order, also prevented renewal. The patriciate, secure in its privileges, resisted reforms that might have revitalized Genoa's economy or expanded political participation. The Republic had become, in many ways, a museum of its own success, elegant, wealthy, and stagnant. Externally, Genoa's strategic position in the Mediterranean made it a target for the ambitions of greater powers. The city's harbors, shipyards, and naval expertise were coveted by both France and Spain, whose rivalry dominated European politics. Caught between these giants, Genoa tried to maintain neutrality while leaning cautiously toward its traditional ally, Spain. This balancing act grew increasingly perilous as France, under the energetic rule of Cardinal Richelieu and later Cardinal Mazarin, sought to dominate the Italian peninsula. Tensions came to a head in the latter half of the 17th century under the reign of Louis XIV, the so-called Sun King of France. His ambition to extend French influence across Europe and the Mediterranean brought him into conflict with the smaller Italian states allied to Spain. Genoa, with its history of financial support for the Spanish crown, was viewed in Paris as an obstacle and a potential prize. The crisis erupted in the year 1684, when France launched a punitive expedition against Genoa. The immediate pretext was the city's refusal to sever its ties with Spain and supply ships to France's fleet. The deeper motive was to break Genoa's independence and force it into the orbit of French power. In May of that year, a French armada commanded by Admiral Abraham Duquesne appeared off the Ligurian coast. Over several days, the ships unleashed a devastating bombardment, the first in European history directed against a civilian city from the sea. The bombardment of 1684 was a shock not only to Genoa but to the entire Mediterranean world. French artillery rained fire upon the city, setting its port and many of its grand palaces ablaze. The bombardment continued for days, killing hundreds and destroying warehouses, churches, and homes. Citizens took refuge in the hills, while the Doge and Senate struggled to negotiate peace. The attack revealed how vulnerable even the most fortified city could be in the age of gunpowder and naval artillery. When the bombardment finally ceased, the terms imposed by France were humiliating, but not ruinous. Genoa was compelled to send its Doge, Francesco Maria Lercari, to Versailles to offer a formal apology to Louis XIV. The image of the Doge bowing before the French king, recorded in the memoirs of contemporary observers, became emblematic of Genoa's decline from the days when emperors and popes had courted its favor. Yet, in a display of dignity that impressed even Louis, the Doge refused to remove his ceremonial cap before the monarch, declaring that the Doge of Genoa uncovers only before God. His defiance, though symbolic, preserved a shred of the Republic's pride. Despite the devastation, Genoa recovered more quickly than might have been expected. Its commercial infrastructure, though damaged, remained functional, and its financial networks abroad continued to yield profits. The Banco di San Giorgio still administered Corsica and other territories, providing a steady income. The Republic's merchants adapted by deepening their trade with France itself, as well as with the Netherlands and England, whose Atlantic empires now dominated global commerce. Yet the balance of power had clearly shifted. The Mediterranean was no longer the center of the world economy, and Genoa's influence within it was fading. Internally, the bombardment marked a psychological turning point. It underscored the vulnerability of small states in an era of continental empires. The Genoese elite, once confident in their ability to navigate between powers, began to realize that the Republic could not indefinitely preserve its independence through diplomacy and finance alone. The city's wealth became increasingly defensive, invested in land, art, and architecture rather than enterprise. Palaces multiplied, but ships grew fewer. Corsica, long under Genoese control, became a source of unrest and expense. The island's rugged terrain and fiercely independent inhabitants resisted Genoese rule, staging repeated revolts throughout the 17th and 18th centuries. The Banco di San Giorgio, which governed the island on behalf of the Republic, attempted to impose reforms and taxation, but met with little success. The cost of maintaining troops and fortifications on Corsica drained Genoa's treasury, while resentment on the island deepened. By the mid-18th century, the Corsican question had become a chronic wound that weakened the Republic's stability and reputation. Meanwhile, Genoa's demographic and economic vitality declined. Plague outbreaks, famine, and emigration reduced the city's population. The once bustling shipyards along the harbor grew quiet, and the merchant fleets that had once connected the Black Sea to the Atlantic dwindled. The Republic's surviving wealth was concentrated in a small class of aristocrats who lived off rents, investments, and the remnants of the Spanish connection. Politically, Genoa retained its formal independence, but in reality, it functioned increasingly as a satellite of larger powers. France and Austria vied for influence over northern Italy, and Genoa found itself compelled to accommodate both. During the War of the Spanish Succession in the early 18th century, the city once again suffered occupation and foreign interference. Though it emerged intact, its autonomy was more illusion than reality. Culturally, however, Genoa's decline in power coincided with an enduring brilliance in art and architecture. The 18th century saw the completion of the city's grand Baroque transformation. The Palazzi dei Rolli, a network of aristocratic residences designated to host visiting dignitaries, became a symbol of Genoa's lingering prestige. Visitors from across Europe marveled at the city's elegance, calling it La Superba, the proud one. Yet the grandeur of its facades concealed the slow erosion of its political and economic strength. By the mid-18th century, the Genoese Republic was living on borrowed time. The world it had once dominated had shifted irrevocably. The rise of global empires, the shift of trade to the Atlantic, and the industrial beginnings in Northern Europe left the old Mediterranean republics behind. Even the financial institutions that had sustained Genoa for centuries struggled to adapt to the new realities of centralized national economies. The final blow to Genoa's autonomy came from the Corsican Rebellion. By the 1760s, the island had fallen into near-permanent revolt under the leadership of Pasquale Paoli, who declared an independent Corsican republic. Exhausted and unable to suppress the uprising, Genoa appealed to France for assistance. In 1768, the Republic sold its rights to Corsica to the French crown. The transaction marked the effective end of Genoa's colonial presence and symbolized its transformation from maritime republic to provincial state. By the closing decades of the 18th century, the Republic of Genoa stood like an aging monument to a vanished world. Its marble palaces still glittered in the Ligurian sun, and its aristocrats still convened in the grand halls of the Palazzo Ducale to elect a doge every 2 years, just as they had for centuries. Yet, outside the city's walls, Europe was changing with a speed that no republic of the old order could withstand. The Enlightenment had given way to revolution, and the forces unleashed in France were about to sweep away the remnants of medieval governance across the continent. Genoa, once a master of adaptation, would not escape this final transformation. The first tremors of change reached the city in the 1790s, when the French Revolution began to reshape the political landscape of Europe. The revolutionary armies, carrying ideals of liberty and equality, marched across Italy under the banner of the newly proclaimed French Republic. For Genoa, the situation was precarious. Its ruling oligarchy, composed of wealthy nobles and merchants, viewed the revolution with alarm, fearing the contagion of republican radicalism and social unrest. Yet, the lower classes and segments of the middle class, inspired by the rhetoric of freedom, began to see in the French example a chance to overturn centuries of aristocratic dominance. For a time, the Genoese government attempted to maintain neutrality, as it had done so often before. The Republic sought to avoid provoking either the Austrians, who opposed the revolution, or the French, whose armies were advancing steadily through northern Italy. This cautious diplomacy, however, could not hold. The fate of the small Italian states was being decided not in their own councils, but on the battlefields of Europe. In 1796, the arrival of Napoleon Bonaparte, then a young general commanding the French army of Italy, shattered the fragile balance. Napoleon's lightning campaign transformed the Italian peninsula in a matter of months. He defeated the Austrians and their allies at Montenotte, Lodi, and Arcole, forcing them to retreat beyond the Alps. Everywhere he went, he established new client republics modeled on revolutionary France, the Cisalpine Republic in Lombardy, the Ligurian Republic in Genoa's own region, and others in central Italy. These states combined republican institutions with French oversight, spreading revolutionary governance under the guise of liberty. Genoa's leaders, confronted by French power on their very doorstep, attempted to negotiate. The Republic declared its neutrality once more, but Napoleon's demands soon made that position untenable. French troops encamped near the city, and revolutionary sympathizers among Genoa's citizens began agitating for reform. Riots broke out in the streets, pitting supporters of the French against defenders of the old order. The government's inability to control events signaled that its centuries-old system of patrician rule was reaching its end. In the spring of 1797, French agents and Genoese revolutionaries collaborated to overthrow the aristocratic government. The ancient republic, which had endured for nearly 700 years, formally ceased to exist. In its place, under French protection, was proclaimed the Ligurian Republic, named after the coastal region that had long formed Genoa's domain. Its constitution, drafted under the guidance of French officials, abolished noble privilege and established a representative assembly modeled on that of revolutionary France. The Doge was replaced by a directory and a bicameral legislature. The trappings of Genoese independence were preserved in name, but real power lay with the French military and their administrators. The transition was greeted with mixed emotions. To many ordinary Genoese, weary of aristocratic dominance, the revolution promised equality and renewal. For the ruling class, however, it was humiliation. The proud republic that had once financed kings and empires was now reduced to a dependent satellite of France. Yet even in subjugation, Genoa displayed its characteristic pragmatism. Many of its merchants adapted quickly to the new regime, securing positions within the Ligurian Republic or working with the French to restore trade and public finance. The Banco di San Giorgio, though stripped of much of its authority, continued to function for a time as the city's financial heart. Napoleon himself, understanding the symbolic weight of Genoa's history, sought to present the transformation as a continuation rather than a destruction of its legacy. He praised the Genoese as a people of the sea and promised that under French guidance they would regain their former prosperity. Yet his ambitions soon extended beyond rhetoric. The French Republic, and later the Napoleonic Empire, viewed the Italian territories primarily as strategic assets. The Ligurian Republic became a buffer state between France and Austria, its ports used to support French naval operations in the Mediterranean. During the first decade of the 19th century, the Ligurian Republic struggled to balance autonomy with subordination. French reforms modernized its administration, introduced the metric system, and secularized many of its institutions. The old patrician families, stripped of political privilege, retained their wealth and adapted by entering the commercial and professional classes. Yet the spirit of independence that had once defined Genoa faded under the weight of French control. The city that had once resisted emperors and popes was now governed by prefects appointed from Paris. In the year 1805, Napoleon abolished the Ligurian Republic altogether and annexed its territory directly into the French Empire. Genoa was divided into French departments, Montenotte, Gênes, and Apennines, each administered as part of Imperial France. French became the language of government, and the Napoleonic Code replaced Genoese law. For many citizens, the change brought efficiency and modernization, new roads, improved sanitation, and reformed education. Yet it also erased the last vestiges of the Republic's ancient identity. The Red Cross of St. George, once flown by fleets across the Mediterranean, disappeared from the city's official seals. The Napoleonic era brought both progress and hardship. Genoa's shipyards were revived to serve the imperial navy, but trade suffered under the continental blockade, which sought to isolate Britain from European markets. The city's merchants, long dependent on maritime commerce, found their livelihoods constrained by imperial policy. Meanwhile, the conscription of Genoese youth into the French army stirred resentment, as did the heavy taxation needed to sustain Napoleon's wars. Beneath the surface of modern reform, discontent simmered. The fall of Napoleon brought with it the final end of Genoa's centuries-long independence. When the French Empire collapsed in 1814, the victorious powers of Europe convened at the Congress of Vienna to redraw the continent's political map. The fate of the former Ligurian territories became a subject of debate. Some Genoese hoped that the old republic might be restored, arguing that its neutrality and history justified renewed autonomy. But the great powers, intent on establishing a stable balance of power, had little interest in resurrecting small states. The British, who had briefly occupied Genoa in 1814, handed the city over to the Kingdom of Sardinia, ruled by the House of Savoy. The decision, formalized in 1815, was a bitter blow. Genoa, once a sovereign republic that had commanded empires through credit and sea power, was now a provincial possession of a monarchy based in Turin. Though the annexation was justified as a union of equals, most Genoese understood it as annexation pure and simple. Riots broke out in protest, but they were swiftly suppressed by Austrian troops supporting the new order. Under Sardinian rule, Genoa retained a measure of local administration, but its political autonomy was gone. The Doge's office, the Senate, and the councils that had governed the city since the Middle Ages were dissolved. The Banco di San Giorgio, after nearly 4 centuries of operation, was liquidated in the 1820s. The palaces of the aristocracy remained, but their owners became subjects of a foreign king. The proud republic had entered the modern age not as a nation, but as a memory. Yet even in defeat, Genoa's influence did not vanish. The city's commercial spirit endured, adapting to new realities. Its port remained one of the busiest in the Mediterranean, serving as a vital link between northern Italy and the wider world. Its merchants continued to trade, its shipyards continued to build, and its financiers, descendants of the great banking families, played roles in the emerging economy of the Italian states. Genoa's traditions of enterprise and navigation, shaped over a millennium, became part of the foundation upon which modern Italy would be built. When the movement for Italian unification began later in the 19th century, Genoa once again found itself at the heart of history. It was from this city that Giuseppe Garibaldi, a native of Nice with deep ties to the Ligurian coast, launched his expedition of the Thousand in 1860, which would help forge the modern Italian nation. In that moment, the spirit of Genoa, its courage, maritime skill, and independence, found new expression in a different form of unity. Thus ended the long arc of the Genoese Republic, from its birth on the shores of Liguria in the 10th century to its dissolution in the age of Napoleon. For nearly 800 years, Genoa had been many things: a commune of sailors, a merchant republic, a crusader ally, a colonial empire, a banker of kings, and finally, a symbol of endurance in a changing world. Few states in history managed to reinvent themselves so often or to influence so many distant lands. Its fall was not a tragedy of destruction, but of transformation. Genoa's independence perished, but its legacy endured, in the ships that still sailed from its port, in the financial institutions that had shaped modern capitalism, and in the very idea that a city, through commerce and cooperation, could command empires without ruling them. The Genoese Republic had ended, but its story, woven through the currents of the Mediterranean and the memory of Europe, remained eternal.